All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Feminists.
Women are strong, tough, independent, and smart.
Also feminists.
Women are victims of their own choices, and it's all your fault.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. A few years ago, in response to the enthusiastic consent narrative as promoted by Reddit feminists, I wrote a blog post. At the time, feminists were proposing the idea of the so-called yes means yes standard based on the claim, essentially, that a woman's overt actions don't represent choices she has made because mental fragility, and therefore they cannot constitute consent. A whole series of arguments were made based on this mental fragility concept, including the claim that rape happens because guys don't understand consent. Feminist solution was that consent can only be considered valid if it is verbal, enthusiastic, and expressed again and again at the request of the involved guy at every step in a given encounter. In my post, The Brutal Rape of Poor Innocent Mr. Creosote, I referred to the Mr. Creosote sketch from Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, in which the title character enters a restaurant vomiting from having overeaten, then orders a full meal and gorges himself again, then establishes that he's too full for anything else when a waiter offers him a complimentary mint. The waiter keeps asking, offering reasons why Mr. Creosote should just accept and eat the mint. "But sir, it's only wafer thin, and just one." Throughout the exchange, it's obvious that Mr. Creosote is tempted. Eventually, he relents, accepts the mint, and eats it. The waiter runs and ducks behind something for cover just before Mr. Creosote explodes. This I compared to feminism's enthusiastic consent narrative, pointing out that feminists would call Mr. Creosote a victim because temptation was shoved under his nose until he abandoned his resolve to resist it. In reality, the waiter might be an asshole, but Mr. Creosote is not a victim. He always had the choice to reject the wafer. He could have demanded his bill, paid, and left the restaurant. He made the choice to accept the waiter's offer instead. I've had a lot of reactions from feminists to that post since I wrote it, mostly complaining that it's not representative of their narrative, then going on to clarify that their narrative is exactly as I've described it.
We're not calling Mr. Creosote a victim. We're saying he's not responsible for his actions or their consequences. His consent wasn't enthusiastic. It's invalid. The consequence was all the waiter's fault.
Now I'm seeing that intersect very strongly with the #MeToo movement. Some women have even put a new twist on it. After months of Me Too stories and complaints, it seems that many boil down to the assertion that women aren't responsible for their own boundaries. This attitude was encapsulated in a tweet I responded to last week. A user going by the name I'm an Art Collective, who, like lots of other immature pixie girls, achieves uniqueness by refusing to use capital letters, got a few thousand retweets and about 5 times as many likes for telling the world women are feckless cowards. In her words,
"Sometimes women, quote, choose, end quote, to have sex with men because they're afraid that if they say no, men will rape them anyway. Many women choose to endure trauma to avoid greater trauma and violation and to allow themselves the illusion of choice, control, and consent."
If you want an explanation of the size and scope of the Me Too movement in a nutshell, that tweet provides a clue to it. The answer? Feminists have convinced a large segment of American women to treat victim as their actual identity. Women who have done this may not label themselves as such. In fact, they'll often do exactly the opposite, adorning themselves with nicknames, labels, and put-on attitudes intending to communicate strength and independence.
"I shaved one side of my head. I wear daggers for earrings. My Twitter name has warrior in it. Look how tough I am."
That doesn't stop them from engaging in the most astounding mental gymnastics to make themselves fit the victim identity. The fear described in the original tweet was self-inflicted. Nothing in it speaks about past trauma or any other reason why any woman might automatically believe that declining sex would lead to her being raped. It just attributes the fear and cites it as a reason why a woman might lie to a potential sex partner, claiming to consent when in her head she isn't consenting. Nobody in the thread even questioned my use of the word lie to describe that, probably because they knew they wouldn't be able to back such a denial without destroying the point of the original tweet. I pointed out some things that should be obvious. The original tweet's claim is that a woman's consent isn't valid if it's a lie based on a self-inflicted delusion of persecution.
I believe without evidence that this man will rape me if I tell him no.
Men aren't responsible for women's delusions of persecution, and such delusions don't make a woman's choices into non-choices. The woman making them is still responsible for her own decisions. The tweet attributes childlike mental fragility to women. That's insulting and degrading. An interesting thing happened. Rather than deal with the ridiculousness of the assertion made in the original tweet, women, and a couple of men, responding to me, began making up reasons not mentioned in it to explain why the described fear might be valid. She might be afraid because of a past experience having nothing to do with her current situation or partner. She might be basing her fear on somebody else's trauma. She might be in a relationship with a violent abuser she has reason to fear. This is Olympic champion level mental gymnastics, all in an attempt at maintaining victim as an identity, either for the commenter herself or for women in general. To begin with, none of these excuses were included in the original statement. It was just the statement that women's consent is sometimes a lie told to their partners in response to their own internal monologues. An excuse that relies on modifying that statement with additional factors doesn't address responses to the original statement. So Art Collective supporters didn't actually support what she said. They argued instead in support of the victim identity itself. Then there's the excuses themselves. Two of them don't actually justify the hypothetical woman's imputation of malice on her hypothetical sex partner, and the third makes remaining in the relationship a stupid choice. Someone hurting you in the past does not make a different person you're with now malicious or dangerous. Neither does someone else's trauma. All three excuses rely on a lack of trust that the hypothetical guy can engage in intimacy without mistreating his partner. All three are simply efforts to maintain victim as the hypothetical woman's identity. At first glance, the abusive relationship claim sounds like the most legitimate excuse. Then reality steps in. Remember, feminists fought long and hard to gender domestic violence victims' services to ensure that women would be the primary recipients of everything. They fought to expand those services to include not only long-term shelter for women and their children, but also financial services, job placement, representation in legal disputes, assistance with access to government aid programs, legal protections for abuse accusers, even legal power to evict one's abuser from the home and compel him to financially support his accuser. All in order to mitigate any hurdles a woman might face to abandoning an abusive relationship. They even ensured a high national saturation of shelters and services like these. In light of these resources, there is literally no excuse for a woman to remain in a relationship so violently abusive that she believes her partner will rape her if she declines his sexual advances. In response to this point, I received arguments from feminists disparaging the results of their own movement's advocacy, claiming these services don't exist, aren't widely available, or aren't sufficient because battered women's syndrome. That last one being, in effect, another use of a woman's own internal monologue as an excuse for a stupid choice. What feminists take credit for when they want to tell you how great their movement is stops existing in their minds the moment it interferes with maintaining victim as the female identity. One commenter insisted that the discussion didn't have anything to do with blaming men, the insinuation being that there's nothing objectionable about the statement because it doesn't directly use terms like rapist or predator. On one hand, this leaves nothing to the comment but an attempt at supporting victim as the female identity. On the other hand, By what has this hypothetical woman been victimized? Let's look at the logical progression of concepts, shall we? In 2012, after a long fight, feminists got the FBI's definition of rape changed. Among other factors, the updated version changed conditions for the crime from against the victim's will to without the victim's consent. This is a significant change in that the original definition relied on the perpetrator's deliberate contravention of the victim's will, while the updated version did not. The post-2012 rape definition, which is more in line with feminist researchers' definition, treats a woman's failure to communicate as a factor in determining a man's guilt. So, back to the scenario Art Collective described. A woman's consent can be illusionary, in other words, not real, a lie, invalid, because of the woman's own internal monologue. She does not disclose this to her partner, but instead actively engages in sex with him. By definition, if we accept Art Collective's logic, the guy has now had sex with a non-consenting partner. What does that make him under the logic feminist enthusiastic consent proponents have imposed on society? Prince Charming? The assumption itself,
If I refuse, he'll rape me,
is based on a fear of men, one that none of the commenters could justify without demonizing men as sexual predators or attributing it to the behavior of at least some men. So here we have the female victim identity cult, deeming a man a rapist without admitting that's what they are doing, and blaming men in general for their attitude. Poor, innocent Mr. Creosote. Through no fault of his own, he found himself victimized, his internal organs blown all over the room by his overstuffed stomach. If only that last wafer-thin mint hadn't somehow inexplicably found its way down his throat. Not that we're blaming the waiter who gave it to him, mind you. Just because we're saying the waiter gave it to him without his consent doesn't mean we're saying the waiter force-fed him. Where did you ever get that idea? Are you tired of the victim identity cult yet? Me too. Imagine a guy decides to go all out on a date. He shows up at his gal's home with a bouquet of expensive flowers and a little gift box. Inside is a pretty expensive necklace that his happy date asks him to put on her before he takes her out to dinner, for which he also pays. And then he takes her to a play for which he purchases both of their tickets. The next day she wakes up to the cops pounding on her door. Upon answering, she finds herself cuffed, dragged outside, shoved into the back of a squad car, lectured on what a horrible person she is on the way to the station, where she's booked on charges of felony theft. The reason? Her date from last night went straight to the cops after dropping her off, sobbing that he only consented to spend so much money on her because he was afraid she'd rob him like the hooker who drugged him and stole his wallet last year in Vegas. He has filed a complaint and now has a temporary restraining order against her. She's not to contact him or approach within 500 feet of him, pending her court date sometime in the next 30 days. And she has to post bail in order to be permitted to go home. All of the female cops that she encounters during her ordeal posture around the idea that they'd just love the opportunity to take a piece out of her, with impunity, of course, for the way she exploited that poor, defenseless guy. Sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? Welcome to HBR Talk 61, #MeToo and the fragility of the feminist, or of the victim identity cult. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with she who must be obeyed, Karen Straughan, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to crack open the fragile female victim identity cult for examination. But first, we gotta lead a horse to water. As you know, the social media gulag is ever expanding, which is one reason why we've diversified to multiple platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and audio-only formats, because we're stubborn. So if you want to consent to keeping track of it all, remember, go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. After all, with all of those non-shadowban shadowbans, you need notifications from badgerfeed.com to tell you what we're doing and when. And if you're listening to our live streams on the main Honey Badger radio channel, please, that's old news. For live streams, the Badger Live Streams channel is where to be. Last but not least, speaking of leading a horse to water, don't forget to like and share this and other Honey Badger live streams so they'll have more social media visibility. If you want more people to be aware of the discussions we have on Honey Badger Radio, lead the way. With that, since we didn't ask multiple times for your consent, let the ear rape begin.
Okay, stop that, Prim. That's really, 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 really offensive to my oral orifices. I did not consent to you penetrating them in that way.
But you liked it anyway.
I actually didn't, but I'm going to let you off the hook this time, just because it needed to be said. This all reminds me of one case. There was an NPR. There was on tabletmag.org or .com or something. I tweeted this article by a woman who evaluated an NPR show called In the Know, no being spelt as N-O, about consent and affirmative consent, right? And so this woman, I agreed with like pretty much everything she said until she got to the last paragraph and said, that isn't feminism. You know, feminism is supposed to be about equality and women's power and all of that crap, right? But everything she said leading up to that last paragraph was absolutely spot on, including she pointed out that, you know, the host of this show, who was so big on yes means yes and affirmative consent and all of that stuff, right? Okay, well, you're not taking into consideration, you know, like my job, this woman who was on the show says, my job is to represent and assist men who have been expelled from college to apply to other colleges. That's my job, right? So I deal with men who have lost their college careers to sexual misconduct accusations, and the process involved, the unfair process involved, try and get them into a different school. That's my job, right? And she said that one of the cases that saw one of her clients kicked out of school involved a man and a woman who went on a date, or they went to a party or something like that. She invited him back to her dorm room. He went into her dorm room and she initiated the sexual encounter, including unzipping his pants and taking his penis and putting it in her mouth. And apparently that did not count as affirmative consent. Her literally taking charge of the sex, taking his penis out of his pants and putting it in her mouth, all under her own steam, did not count as affirmative consent because he didn't bother asking her, do you consent to what you're currently doing with my penis? Under your own volition, unilaterally, and without asking me if it's okay.
But didn't you know, just because a woman puts a penis in her mouth doesn't mean that she consents to it, though.
I know. It's like, it's so fucking stupid. Like, how ridiculous are we, you know? And then the whole thing with, you know, the she didn't consent. This all reminds me of the Lena Dunham thing, right? Okay, because Lena Dunham's big shtick with Barry the Republican in her freaking memoir, which nobody has the right to write a memoir at freaking age 26 or whatever the fuck it is that she did. I would expect you to be a little older than that before you lived enough to have enough interesting shit that people would want to read about it. But unless you're like, I don't know, the woman in that photo at age 9 running from a napalm attack in Vietnam with her clothes burning off her body, right? You know, if you're I know her last name is Fook. I don't remember her first name. But if you're that person, I guess maybe by age 26, you've got enough life experiences to write about your life and have people interested in reading it. But if you're Lena Dunham, what have you got to talk about? Your dad's freaking horrific obsession with like disgustingly over sized, exaggerated female genitals and, 6-inch long nipples. Like, what do you have? I guess maybe she was traumatized by that. Who knows? But she talked about Barry and how when she was describing the rape that she suffered, right? She was saying essentially, I was talking dirty in his ear. I was egging him on. I was asking him to thrust harder and faster, all in an attempt to convince myself that I was consenting to this.
Oh my God.
So literally you can have a woman who is enthusiastically saying, give it to me. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Harder, harder, harder. Oh my God, yes. And she's still not consenting if in her internal fucked up narrative, that's not the case.
Well, I mean, like, he still has to ask, obviously. Like,
Why would you have to ask? Like, honestly, if I go up to the counter at McDonald's and they don't ask me, can I help you? What can I get you? I just go up and say directly, I want a fucking Big Mac and I want it right now. And they give it to me, right? Does the fact that they didn't ask me what I wanted mean that I don't have to pay for the Big Mac they give me? Like, what the fuck?
I think the Big Mac also has to ask you if it's okay if it goes in your mouth.
Yeah.
You have to get the talking variety because you're female
exactly.
and your decisions don't matter,
I am so fucking sick of this shit. I am so sick of it. I'm sorry. I'm very angry and I'm in a bad mood.
That's okay. It's perfect for discussing this topic.
I'm feeling a little hostile to the women out there who don't want to own their own choices. Like, literally, when you decide, right, to have sex with a guy, whether you want to or not, because lots of women have sex when they don't necessarily really feel like having sex, and that's fine. Lots of men do too, right? Okay? And sex is not some kind of sacred fucking Hail Mary thing, right? That is it's the holiest of holies. It is the thing that must be respected above everything else, right? Is that, if a woman engages in sex when she's not 100% enthusiastic, some kind of fucking crime has been committed against her. I know women who are like, I'll suck your dick if you give me your credit card so I can go shoe shopping, right? Like, how does that factor into any of this?
Well, even if it was the holiest, most sacred thing that anybody could ever do, if she was the one who made the choice to do it, she is still engaging in the act. She's the one who is still doing the thing. Who else is supposed to do it for her? I don't understand. Why does she want to have this responsibility taken off of her? I've said this before, like, these people really want us to go back to having chaperones? Like, I mean, I guess the chaperone would have to be a woman, though, because, like, far be it from a man to consent for another woman. I don't even know. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's just turtles all the way down.
All right. Well, Alison.
Yes, I'm here. I've been listening to this and I'm actually astounded by your story. No. Astounded is not that's the wrong word. It's more like you just fall a little bit further into a pit of despair, but you're not really surprised about it. It's like, that slope. I'm still falling, still slipping into the slime, into the ooze, into the disgusting drac of the human id.
They keep the shovels.
The black abyss of hopelessness, yeah?
Yeah. So it's not, astounded isn't the right word. It's more like despairing.
It's like, haven't I hit the fucking bottom yet?
Yeah, it's
how much lower can this go?
Yeah, it's like, I'm bored of this slide into oblivion now. Can we have some oblivion, please?
Dig through the Earth's core now.
It really blew my mind having that discussion on Twitter, and it like seeing this happen over and over again, seeing it happen in stories of women's behavior and conversation with feminists and conversation with traditionalist women, because this is not strictly a feminist thing. I've had tradcons do this to me too, and it hit me all of a sudden that it's an identity. It's not just an identity like as in identity politics, but you think of your identity, if somebody asked me my identity, my first thing would be, oh, well, my name is, but I would think, well, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I have this job, and I have, like my full-time job as a direct support professional for intellectually disabled adults. I work, I do a lot of different types of work, all these things are part of my identity. I can't imagine what a crippling weight it would be to carry around, to have inflicted upon myself under the influence of an ideology like feminism, on the steroid of gynocentrism, to have limited myself to where my identity has to be victim, and anything that contradicts the idea that victim is my identity because I'm female, which is like the least thing. Being female is the least aspect of my identity. I really never think about it unless it's brought up or I have a health condition that's gendered, right? But to make victim your main aspect of your identity, or the entirety of your identity, to the degree where information that contradicts your victimhood is threatening to you because it's a threat to your identity, that'd be the darkest timeline to live in. It would be a living hell. And all I can think of is all the things that feminists have done to women, of all the things that they've inflicted, all the stupidity, all of the mental gymnastics that women go through. I think that's the worst, that they've put that on them. And yeah, I mean, we joke about it. We joke about the slope. We joke about the dark place and everything. But it just, I really feel sorry in a way for the women that have chosen that path, and they have a rough time breaking out of it. It scares them, the idea of not being victims. Can you imagine being afraid of finding out that your identity is not victim?
I saw it, actually. I saw that entire process play out, and it was during the first ICMI in 2014. We went to the ICMI and we were being, I guess, trailed, stalked, something or other by the Vice people. You remember?
Oh,
was it
yeah.
the Vice or BuzzFeed? Yeah.
Vice, yeah.
Vice. And although the young woman who eventually did the article on us seemed reasonably, she seemed like she had a reasonable amount of personal agency. She had a friend, and I'll also mention that the guys who were behind the camera seemed really sleazy in some. No offense, Vice. What the hell am I talking about? Take all the offense. All of the offenses directed at you, Vice. You hire sleazy people. But she had a friend. She either had a friend who was giving her a couch to stay on while she trailed us, or this person was somehow otherwise connected to the Vice crew. And at the convention, we're watching this video, and this is the first time we'd shown this video, and it was of one of Mike's extremely black humor cartoons that sort of mock an aspect of what we're facing in the society in general. And in this case, it was mocking, swear to God, honest to God, feminist academic article on pickup artistry that targeted the mystery method, specifically the cat and mouse method that he counsels men to use. And if you don't know who Mystery is, he's a really big pickup artist, or at least he was, a few years ago. And the method that he counseled was that when a woman would give last-minute resistance, and in the pickup artist parlance, that's not actual legitimate resistance, because if it's legitimate resistance, you're supposed to not, stop. It's the resistance of wanting to feel swept away by the passion. Mystery's suggestion for men was the moment that women gave that token resistance, that I just don't know if we should kind of resistance, they should stop everything. If they're on the couch, going for second base, they should get off the couch and go and make themselves a sandwich or go play a game. Just stop the interaction dead. And the idea behind that is it gives her room to pursue him. And so it's almost reversing the last minute token resistance. And he says that somebody in the situation will have to make that resistance. So it feels like you're swept away. So you do it as a man. And I swear to God, the feminist in that paper argued that it was problematic because Mystery was counseling men to use women's biology against them. So when a woman says, no, I can't, I don't know if we should, and he just stops and does something else. So he gives her the space.
Takes her no for an answer. Yeah.
Gives her the space, either be like, yeah, you know what, that was a bad idea. Or, oh my goodness, he's going away. I have to chase after him because he's giving me last minute resistance now. And I am aroused by that because it is about, having that last little threshold that you have to be pushed over into the passion and bliss and whatever.
Yeah.
So, but she was qualifying a man doing that. Woman gives token resistance, man walks away to give her space to either figure out what the hell she wants or come run after him. And that's supposed to generate the desire. At that point, it's either going to happen or it isn't, as using her biology against her.
Yeah.
And she called it problematic. She called it a problematic sexual encounter. Now we all know what problematic is, a code word. Towards rape.
I'm surprised she didn't call it rape by Evo Psych,
Yeah, but
or whatever.
Just to get back into my anecdote, we had mocked that with a cartoon in which a sloth was raping herself using a tree. Well, she wasn't really. The joke is that she wasn't actually.
She was masturbating with the tree.
She was masturbating with the tree, and actually, the tree didn't want it. But that was way at the end. The individuals in question never saw the end. This woman who came with the Vice reporter was so frail, like you could feel the emotional fragility, and she was so delicate. And she came over and watched this mocking of this sloth who herself was raping a tree who couldn't get away from her, but saying that the tree was using her biology against her, even though the tree is an inanimate object. And she watched this, and I saw her just crumple like a dried rose, and her hand came up to her mouth, and she was just. I'm like,
oh my goodness, I have never used an electric toothbrush in that way.
And I'm like, what the hell?
How dare you?
And I'm like, she literally thought that, I guess she thought that we were mocking rape victims. The sloth is not a rape victim. She is the rapist. We're mocking a rapist.
It's because we know that these guys don't actually want the enthusiastic consent. What they want is the control over what men are doing. That you can tell in the way that they react, because either they say, "Oh, you raped me because you didn't get affirmative consent from me," or you're being problematic right now because you're using my lack of consent, quote unquote, against me. So it's like, okay, well, the only winning strategy is clearly not to play then, because that's basically what you're saying. Why should I bother with you? You don't make any sense.
See, what they really want, what they really want is control over the situation put in a woman's hands, but in a way that doesn't put the responsibility on her for exercising that control. That's like victim identity cultists are offended.
The final point of the story is, at the time I couldn't figure out what was freaking her out so much, and now I realize what it was. We were taking away her victimhood identity.
Exactly. This is
that was all that was left of her. She literally had calcified or just I don't know, put herself in some kind of psychological what are those things that create the I don't know, apple chips, dryer things. She turned herself dehydrate her. She turned herself into human beef jerky, and she's like, she's just collapsing in on herself. There's nothing left but the victim identity. And I'm looking at her. I'm thinking to myself, you got to get away from feminism. You have to. Just get a little bit of juice, some vitality in you.
It's
like
that
one
moment.
of those poofy dogs that you get wet and then all of a sudden it's nothing left.
Yeah, it's that moment in Total Recall where you know, he starts repeating 2 weeks over and over again because something's been triggered.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And the disguise falls apart because that's not a true identity. Victim is not a true identity. There are people that have been through horrific shit in their lives. Like, people hear about my experiences. People hear about, you know, some of the stuff that's happened to me that's been rotten. And they're like, oh my God, you've had a horrible life. When I really don't feel like I've had a horrible life. I've had a pretty darn good life. For starters, I was born and grew up in the United States and began voting like right around the age of 18, first election after I turned 18. I mean, I learned how to drive when I was not high school yet. You know, there's a lot of things I've done that women in other countries can't do. I've had a pretty good life. Had great medical care when I got sick, you know. But there have been people that have grown up in terrible, terrible situations and who, when they leave those situations and they end up someplace better or in a better situation, and they get on with their lives, they don't make victim their identity. They might talk about their experiences and the lessons that they learned from them and the things that other people can learn from them. Like they may even talk about changes, social changes that are needed because of their experiences. You know, and I do that with my experiences too. They're not horrific, but there were bad things I dealt with that I learned from that I can turn around and say, you know, this idea of spraying for mosquitoes might be a problem because it kills the predators that eat mosquitoes, and then there are more mosquitoes, and they're more likely to grow in places that carry diseases. Will put diseases into them, and then you end up with more people getting West Nile and encephalitis and stuff like that. Which nobody should experience if they don't have to. And those are things that you can learn. But if I went through my whole life being just totally broken by the fact that I had brain swelling and almost died when I was 12, and couldn't get past that, and couldn't, you know, live past the chronic fatigue that came out of it, and couldn't do anything, couldn't have a job, couldn't do this, couldn't be an activist, couldn't have a social life because chronic fatigue from one time having brain swelling and chronic pain from probably one time having brain swelling and stuff like that. I would be a wreck. I would be a totally different person. And it's just heartbreaking to see people go through that and put themselves through that and live like that. But at the other end of it, if you put yourself in that situation and you adopt that as your entire identity, right? You adopt a thing like that as your entire identity. I will now be a chronic fatigue woman for the rest of my life. And everything I do, everything I think, everything I say, my social media presence, my interaction with the people around me, my getting up in the morning and having breakfast and the way I do that, all has to have chronic fatigue has to factor into it, and I've got to be too tired to handle certain things, and I've got to be unable to have certain types of conversations because they're just exhausting, and I can't earn a living because it's just exhausting, and I can't enjoy the company of other people because it's just exhausting. And to do that, if somebody came along and said, well, actually, I have this information that might help you not have to suffer chronic fatigue for the rest of your life, it might feel like a threat. It might feel like, I'm going to destroy your identity, which is a hair shy in the mind of somebody who is so wrapped up in one thing as their identity. It's a hair shy from, I'm going to kill you. It's like a small death. And I have a feeling that when we hear "I don't feel safe because these people with other ideas are around that disagree with my ideas," that's probably where it's coming from. The idea that they can't feel safe because we're there. They can't feel safe because their identity is challenged.
I want to say one thing, and then I'm going to take off and get out of your all's chemistry.
Okay. I was just about to put the badger in the window.
Fine then, just go, Allison. Are you fucking abandon us, Allison? Nobody. We don't even like you anyway, Allison. Fuck you. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's so mean.
Oh my God! I wish I could abandon you and then still be here, so I could abandon you again, Karen.
I agree.
Well,
I would love that.
Well, now you're on top of Karen, so that's very sexy.
Okay. All right. With that, I just wanted to say
I'm not even going to turn your badger around because you're leaving.
You're probably right. She thought that we were.
God damn it! Let Allison make her point. Jesus.
Yeah, Karen wants to get to the part where I leave faster. All right. I just want to. You're probably right about. I mean, she was just so delicate, so very fragile. I'm like looking at her, like, what are you, 25? You're acting like you're 85. Go out and get some vitality. Find a pump where you can just suck on it and get some vitality, woman. But anyway, you're probably right. She probably completely and utterly identified with victimhood to the point where the idea that we could possibly challenge women being raped in every circumstance horrified her. Because that was like us killing her identity. Even though it wasn't a woman who was being raped, it was a woman who was engaging in raping something else. It just horrified her. And like I said, I was astounded by that. I've never seen, well, yeah, actually, I would honestly say that is the weakest woman I've ever seen in my life. I was amazed that she could even move. She just looked like she was just constantly on the verge of disintegrating. And like I said, I was like, you need to get away from feminism. You need to get some strength back in you. But what I wanted to say is that, have you noticed the progression? Before I leave, I'm going to leave you on an even more depressing thought about the endless slide into oblivion. Have you noticed the progression here? Because when I went to school way back when, like almost 2 decades ago, went to university, the big thing was no means no. No means no. And then like maybe a decade later, it was yes means yes. And now it's enthusiastic consent. Have you noticed how they keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing what is considered acceptable consent or acceptable expression of consent on women's part? And I'm like, what's going to be the future? Like, we know that they're not going to stop with enthusiastic consent. That's obvious. So what's the next bar that women are going to have to, in order to demonstrate consent to men? What's the next thing that they're going to go for?
Mind reading.
We're
already there. We're already there, because even though one could consider that woman who invited a man into her dorm room, enthusiastically undid his pants, whipped out his dick, and put her mouth around it. Okay. One could assume that she was enthusiastically consenting, given all of the outward signs. The man clearly failed to read her mind and determined that actually she was not consenting to her own actions, and therefore, yeah.
But what if in her mind she was consenting in that moment? Because I can't imagine. She's like taking his dick out, she's sucking it, and in her mind she's like, no. Like,
no. Okay, I get into this. I get into this in my 2 videos called The Quandary of Consent and The Quandary of Consent Part 2, right? And where women, if you actually do a content analysis of romance novels, in terms of, which is a subgenre of fiction, or a genre of fiction that is written almost entirely by women and targeted towards a female audience, what you find are 3 very, very common tropes, okay? So the first one that was more common in the 80s, it's now been sort of feminists have flushed it out. They've gotten rid of it from the mainstream categories of romance fiction and pushed it into more heavily eroticized categories of erotic romance and romantica and all of that stuff, right? But what that is okay, so the man actually legitimately rapes the woman early in the book, right? So in the first maybe 3 chapters, he rapes her. She resists. She doesn't just not consent, she resists. And he knows it, and she knows it, and everybody knows what's going on. And then over the next 200 to 300 pages of the book, he convinces her that if you knew me then the way you know me now, you would have consented. You that would not have been rape, right? So you have an incidence or a trope wherein women do not consent. They actively resist. They do not even consent in the privacy of their own thoughts, right? To, and they are raped, and then they end up marrying the guy and living happily ever after because he proved to them over the course of the next however many weeks of the course of the novel that if you knew then what you know now about me, you would have consented, right? So that's the first trope. Second trope is where, and this is what is allowed, and I know this because I had to deal with fairly mainstream romantic erotica guidelines, editorial guidelines, right? So it absolutely had to be that if a rape scene was going to be depicted as erotic, as something that would turn somebody on, at least prior to the point of penetration of the woman, you would have to have the woman consent, at least in her own mind, right? So even if she was actively and physically outwardly resisting, right, at some point before he, I guess, pushes through her boundaries, right, she says, okay, says to herself in the privacy of her own mind, okay, I really, really want this. Yes, I actually really want this. This is totally hot. I'm turned on and I'm like hot and bothered and I want it, right? And that was, and then of course you have the situation where the man is technically a rapist because mens rea, right? He was not aware that she was consenting. He believed she was resisting. He believed that she was not consenting, and yet he went ahead and did it anyway. Right. So, and this is like a huge fucking trope in romance novels. And then there's a third trope, which is, the woman gives retroactive consent, right? Just in these first 2 cases, the woman gives active consent. It's all fine because now I feel differently from the way I felt back then, right? Or now I'm willing to, put the past, and all of this stuff. Okay, so anyway, the third trope is the most troublesome in the age of yes means yes, and it is the one where you have this woman living. She's a widow living on the prairies, right, on a farm, or she's like a milliner in a small freaking western town or some shit, right? Okay, and maybe she has to nurse some dude back to health after he was shot on a train, trying to intervene in a train robbery or something like that. And she's been recruited to intervene, and she's really attracted to him, and he's really attracted to her. But he's a state marshal, and he's going to be moving on. He's going to be going back to the capital. And he's not going to be sticking around. And she's like, okay, she gets to this point where she says, I want to fuck you. She essentially says, I want to fuck you. And he says, I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that's something that you're going to regret. because I can't stay. Okay, and this can't turn into anything. And she says, no, I insist. I insist. How dare you? How dare you tell me my own mind and what is good for me, right? And what is not good for me. Okay, and then he finally relents against his better judgment, and they have sex, and the next morning she's like, how could you let me do that?
Oh my
You
God.
raped me.
Son of a bitch.
Okay, and these
isn't-
are like super fucking common in romance novels.
And isn't that just so perfect, given that we were talking about what's next, mind reading? Well, apparently, no, not even that is good enough.
Clairvoyance, telling the future.
Yes.
Mind reading 2 weeks from the date of it happening, or 2 months, or 2 years. At some point, is this bitch going to regret what she did?
You must
Right?
be able-
Why don't we just eliminate the statute of limitations altogether? Right? We can make it so that a woman can put a man in prison because she says she didn't really want it, and she can bring that up 40 years from the point that it happened. Oh, I didn't really mean it.
This is actually getting really.
You should have known. You should have known.
No,
You
but
must
seriously,
You must be able to create your own DeLorean to sleep with me.
seriously,
Fuck.
like this is not going to stop with affirmative consent. I don't even think it's going to stop with mind reading, because even if the man said, "Well, I mind read her," she can always say, "No, no." Well, I mean, I know you're being absurd. They're trying to go with some sort of physical. They're trying to pretend like this is about making some kind of legal standard that works. It's not. There's at this point there is no legal standard that works. Affirmative consent doesn't work. It doesn't even physically affirmative consent isn't good enough. How about female initiated sex? Is the only sex that's consensual female initiated?
No, because it's not.
Well,
they've
already deemed that non-consensual too.
That's non-consensual.
Yeah.
So
the whole thing is a massive power play, because the way that you obtain power over somebody, right, and maintain that power and maintain them as subordinate to you, is to say, here's a super vague set of rules, and here's a super vague set of limitations and restrictions, and if I decide in my own brain, right, that you have violated any one of these things that I haven't really told you what they are, right? If you violate them, okay, I can punish you.
Well, and
here's the thing.
They don't go both ways, and I am not accountable for my decisions when I punish you for breaking those rules. I'm not accountable for my decisions when you follow the rules and I change the rules, and I'm not accountable for anything I do that makes it appear that the rules have been applied and everything is in compliance with them. That is what they're basically going with.
I make up the rules as I go along.
Yeah.
I make up the rules as I go along, and you have to abide by them, whether it's in the moment or 2 years after it happened. You will be held accountable for whether you violated my super vague, super flexible, ever freaking ephemeral rules of what. So, like, literally what they're doing is they're trying to make it illegal for men to have sex with women that the woman later regrets for whatever reason.
Yeah, no.
And you
What's next?
can't make a functional society based on this.
No, exactly. What's
Not at all.
next?
You can't. And the other thing is, the other thing is that you make all of these vague rules. Eventually, it's going to be a situation where, well, if you're a lady listening to us now and you're just grinding your teeth and you're like, well, I should have the right to 2 weeks afterwards, if he hadn't revealed this thing, to call it rape. I didn't like it. My parents were angry with me. My friends mocked me. I should be able to call it rape. You're grinding your teeth because we're pointing out that that's completely untenable. You realize that going forward, if you're a woman who marries a man and he is not a virgin, or even if he is a virgin, he's falsely accused, your entire life will be screwed with his. Maybe not as screwed as his, But your entire life, imagine that. You're a homemaker. You finally scored Mr. Big, Mr. 50 Shades of Grey, or whatever the hell. And he gets accused of this. And within a few months, his life has cratered. And so has yours. Like, do you care now?
I have said this exact argument in my Me Too video from way back when. These guys don't think about these sorts of things. It's pathetic that it has to wait until it happens to somebody that they care about, be it their husband, their son, their father, whoever is close to them. That is the only time when they realize, oh, hey, maybe there might be some drawbacks to this kind of logic or lack thereof.
Well, it's like that Grossman woman, Janet Grossman. Jan.
Oh yeah, the one who.
Went
her son.
A woman, a feminist, aghast at the was it the Wall Street Journal? Writing that her son. She was a woman who was marching at the barricades with the feminists, marching on the barricades. Demanding women's equal rights and all of this stuff, right? And then her son's in college and he gets falsely accused of sexual misconduct, of rape, by a woman who broke up with him 2 years before. And this is a 2-year-old accusation, and she has to go through this process with her son. And she's like, what the fuck is going on here? And I'm like, what the? How can you even ask that, bitch?
Yeah. And she's part of the movement that created this.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, but there are times, and I'm gonna come clean to all of you. Okay, I have had my way with many men rather, in my life, right? I have had more sexual encounters with different men than I could probably enumerate. Not in the hundreds or anything like that, but certainly over 50. And there are some that, if it was as easy as just hitting the alarm, like in Groundhog Day, and redoing the day, I probably, there's been a few where I wouldn't do it again if I knew, how I would feel afterwards. Of course. Absolutely, of course. Right? Are there any that I would say to myself, would I go to the trouble of building a time machine, right, to go back and change that decision because because the regret was so horrific, or the regret had no value, right? And this is really the thing, is that when you do something that you regret, the regret has value. It has a value. It has a positive value on your life. You're supposed to learn from that. You're supposed to learn, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and do better in the future, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, women should never, ever, 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 ever have any sexual experience that they could possibly regret, and that regret has no positive value, right? Regret for one's own decisions has no positive value. It should actually, all of the responsibility for that decision that would lead to a woman reevaluating her own decisions, reevaluating how she makes those choices, right? All of that positive value that can come from regretting a decision, right? We're saying, oh, yeah, no, fuck that, right? Punish the guy because he either didn't read her mind in the moment or couldn't tell the future.
Yeah, if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's just that women are not allowed to ever feel anything other than bliss, or else someone has got to pay hell.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable. And what I see, you guys were talking about, what's next? What's the next standard going to be? I don't think we're going to have standard after standard, and it's not going to be a slippery slope down to the bottom. And the reason is actually, it was illustrated by the Three Stooges in the Disorder in the Court movie. That one, by the way, is public domain, so I'll have to find that and Maybe I'll put it into an episode sometime. But there's this scene where Curly is called to the stand, and he has to swear on the Bible that he'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You've actually heard the sound from that in the show too. In any case, he has a cane in one hand, and he's wearing a hat. And it's rude, for a man to wear a hat in a courtroom, right? So the bailiff tells him to take off his hat. Now he's got his hands full, and then he tells him to put his hand on the Bible, and so he puts his hat back on and he puts his hand on the Bible, and then he tells him to take off his hat, and he takes his hat off, and then he tells him to put his hand on the Bible, and it goes back and forth like this over and over again, and there is no right way for him to do that because he's got his hands are going to be full when he takes his hat off, and he can't put his hand on the Bible, and until he puts down the cane. And at some point in the sketch, it sort of blows up, and I can't remember the scene to the degree of what it is that puts a stop to it, but something puts a stop to it, and he eventually puts something down so that he can put his hand on the Bible and be sworn in. Well, in terms of the social situation we're in now, and the legal situation we're in now, we're going to get to a point where men who are in Curly's position and the bailiff that's the legal position are going to say this is enough bullshit, and women are in the same boat. They're at the other end of the boat, but they're in the same boat. They're still dealing with the fact that there is no right way to have a sex encounter with a man and be convinced that you're not a victim of it. That's right, he does. He puts his hat on the bailiff's head. I knew I had to go back and watch that. Anyway, oh geez, and I can't pronounce this. I don't know if it's Amasang. Hopefully I pronounced it right. Amasang is the one who told me in the chat there. But yeah, at some point women are going to be like, we can't go on dates. We can't have sex. We can't have boyfriends. We can't get married. Is it he puts his hat on the cane? Okay, so we have two. Now I really have to go back and watch it. Because we have Belias Fire says he puts his hat on the cane. So
it
now
sounds, if it's the Three Stooges, it sounds more, I would suggest that it would be more funny for him to stick the hat on the bailiff's head.
Yeah, it would. But I don't know. It might be, there might be two versions of it out there, but I doubt it. He might do both. So in any case, the bailiff might give him the hat back. But the thing is, at some point, women are going to be like, okay, stop. No more. Stop speaking for us. The victim call is going to get called out. And there are more and more of us every day that are calling that victim call out because we are sick and tired of being told that we have to be completely immobilized by their standards. I don't accept their standards anymore. Yeah. Their standards can screw off.
I just worry that, by the time that more women, enough women figure it out, it's like, how long is it going to take to try and get relations back to normal? Because, these guys, they should only take so much risk. Like I don't blame any of them for being a little hesitant to get involved with people who might do this kind of thing to them. So it's like, just how long is it going to take? And how many women is it going to take being like, no, you guys need to fuck right off in order for things to get fixed again?
Yeah.
Well, what I find hopeful is, like I was on a fireside chat with Brian this morning with two women, Hannah and Ilan. They are German. Ilan wrote a book from the perspective of someone who spent 2 years in prostitution, about what she learned about men throughout those 2 years, and I find it really interesting that so many of the people who are involved, at least whether fully in men's rights or peripherally in these issues, are sex workers of some sort or another. It's actually, when you think about how many women out of 1,000 are sex workers, and then you think of how many prominent women who speak out about these issues are sex workers, and it's or have been, it's quite a lot. Hannah had put out a video, essentially sort of almost like, you remember that Dear Woman video, right? That everybody groaned over because it was like so retarded and ridiculous. But she'd put out a statement to men about essentially acknowledging that, like, men are capable of harming women.
Was that Dear Women or was that Dear Men? It was basically, no. Dear men, we're sorry, we've been pieces of shit, and we were wrong.
It wasn't that. It was just recently, and it just recently went viral. But it was acknowledging that women have power over men. It was acknowledging that women sometimes abuse their power over men and hurt men, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, realizing what they're doing, that they're hurting somebody else. And one of the things that both of them said to me or to me and Brian, that really struck me was it was when they acknowledged that they had the power to hurt men. That was when everything just kind of came clear, and it was like acknowledging that I have the power to hurt men means that I have power. And it also means that just because I have been wounded, that does not mean that the men that I have hurt have not also been wounded, right? And so Hannah, the one who put together the video, she said, and this is what gives me hope, she said that she went to a conference. She's a mediation counselor, essentially. So she's somebody who's brought in to mediate family conflict and divorce and all of these kinds of situations, right? And counsel people on how to divorce without destroying each other, or how to stay together if that's feasible, and things like that, right? She said that she went to she just felt like she had to write something, and so she wrote it down. And then she was attending a conference for counselors in her field, and they had a segment where there was an open mic for an hour or two or whatever one evening. So anybody could come up and just say what they felt like saying. And this happens at conferences. I think we should have one at the next ICMI as well, an open mic. But anyhow, so she got up and she was terrified. She was terrified that she was going to get absolutely ripped apart by the women in the audience and all of that. And she started reading this statement, this text that she had written. And she, at one point, she said, if there are any women in the audience who feel the same way, please come up and stand beside me while I read. And she said, by the end of it, every woman in the audience was standing on the stage, and every man in the audience had tears in his eyes.
That is
right?
That is a sign of hope. And it's something I've noticed too. The first ICMI, the one in Michigan, on my way back, I had my Voice for Men t-shirt on from the event, and I had been reading a book, Bachelor Pad Economics. I believe the author's name is Aaron Clary. I may have that wrong. Okay. In any case, so I mean, I wasn't yelling to everybody on the bus, hey, everybody, men's rights activists over here, look at me, or anything like that, but I wasn't hiding it either. And the fella looked over at me, and he saw the Voice for Men logo on my shirt, and he asked me about it. So I started talking to him about it. And two moms, and I could tell from some of the things that I'd overheard them talking about, that they were moms. They both mentioned their kids. They turned around and they were just kind of listening, and then one of them piped up when I started talking about the problems boys were facing in education, and she goes, "Exactly, yes, nobody is talking about this," and the first thing out of my mouth was, "We are." And I talked to her about a few different sources of information within the men's rights movement and among anti-feminists. I pointed out at the time.
Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I talked about Jonathan Taylor and his studies and the impact on education. I pointed out, I think the war on boys was one I pointed out to her. There were a bunch of different things that I basically, was able to reference. But what I figured out was women who have sons, they're aware of this. Women who have husbands are aware of this. Women whose brothers or their male friends, when they've seen this stuff fall them, a lot of women are not aware that the law is a mess because they don't seek to exploit it. Women who do seek to exploit it don't care that it's a mess because, or they're happy that it's a mess because they can exploit it. And of course, women who have been close to somebody who has been targeted by one of those women, when they find out how a mess the law is, they are appalled. And the road to self-examination starts. And all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, have I been a part of this problem? And it's hard to, it's a hard self-examination to go through. Like even being aware, aware of the hypocrisy of the feminist equality myth. And it is a myth. The feminist brand of equality is a myth. It is not equality, and it isn't going to exist ever, because it can't. It's not a possibility. But in any case, you look back and you're like, well, just based on the way that society treats women, I've gotten away with being a shit at times when I should have been a better person, and I haven't taken the lessons that you normally take when you are called to account for being a shit, because I wasn't called to account for being a shit. And now I have to look back at those times, and I realize that I was a shit during those times and nobody called me to account. But the damage that you do when you are a shit to another person was still done, and it was my fault. And so you have the guilt and you have the lesson now, but you could have learned the lesson then. And there are things that, women go through their lives a lot of times not being called to account when they should be called to account. And so the next time they come across a decision crossroads, do I go this way? Do I go that way? And that way happens to involve stepping on someone. They don't even see the body in the road that they're about to step on. They have not learned the lesson that you learn from being called to account. And I think they go through years of that a lot of times and never pick it up until they've done it enough or somebody calls them to account, and then they look back, and then, of course, then they're at another crossroads. Do I acknowledge this? Do I admit this and deal with the pain and embarrassment of it? Or do I put on my blinders and put in my earplugs and sing la la la, I can't hear you, and go on stepping on people? And there are women that take both paths.
I think the reality of it is most blatantly stated in the headline of it. I think it was a Telegraph article or something like that. The agony of being a 50-50 mom. And it was all about how we should feel sorry for women who miss out on those first moments, the first steps, the first words, the first time the kid stuck the butter knife in an electrical socket, like those firsts, that we all treasure. The first time that your kid managed to get his diaper off and wipe poo all over the floor, the first time the kid, managed to break through the baby gate and get outside the house while you were taking a shit, all those wonderful first moments of being a parent, but essentially saying that women who were subjected to equal shared parenting, 50-50 parenting, was actually like victimizing these women. And yet I'm thinking to myself, we just completely just assume that men who don't get any custody of their kids whatsoever, right? Maybe they get every other weekend access. Maybe they don't, right, get any access at all, right, there's no agony there. At least there's no agony that's deserving of any kind of sympathy there. And I'm like, I was just blown away by this. Like literally these women were complaining about how horrific and hard and unfair it is that they had to share custody of their kids 50-50 with the father.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what
self-awareness
do you think
level.
men have been going through for like however long since the Tender Years Doctrine? What do you think these men have been feeling? Right.
There was an article that was written in response to that, actually. It was titled "The Agony of Being a 50-50 Mother." Oh, please. It's called Equality, and fathers deserve their share just as much as women. So I was really impressed that they published that article because it was on the same website. And then it's just like, oh yeah, well, no doubt struggling to be heard over the swell of sympathy violins. These mothers all bemoaned the inconvenience of 50-50 access, implying that dads should be neither seen nor heard except when coughing up child support, of course.
Yeah. No, and it's like literally you're saying, well, I missed some moment in my child's life, some iconic moment, and I missed that, and that was just a catastrophe that I missed that. And it's like, even when men and women are still married, they're in intact marriages, who misses those moments more often?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Well, and it's that's that lack of self-awareness. Part of that comes from, like I said, women are not called to account when they act like shits to other people. And growing up that way, like girls growing up that way and then becoming young women who are not called to account, and then middle-aged women who are not called to account, and they go through that all their lives. They never learn to pay attention to and care about the damage that they do and the suffering that's experienced around them. And of course, when they do become aware of it, and they do develop a concern or a consideration for it, it becomes something exaggerated just for that unique situation because they're so not used to dealing with it. But I wanted to point out that also goes along with the victim identity. When your whole entire identity, what's eaten up everything else about you, it eats up your womanhood, it eats up your motherhood, it eats up your any relationship you might have with another person, a partner. It eats up your whole family relationship. It even eats up not just your motherhood status, but your actual relationship with your children. Your victim identity is between you and your children. That is all you can see. Poor me, I lost the experience of those milestones. Not my poor kids, they're being bounced back and forth between mom and dad instead of having us both in the same home, being a team and caring about each other so they can see what a relationship is like, and working together to provide care for them and sharing those moments with them. No, it's just poor me. I didn't get to be the rescue squad that came in the middle of the night with cough syrup and a pat on the back until the cough syrup works to help the kid get through the croup. I didn't get to be the one that came in the middle of the night with Tylenol and a cool cloth to help with the fever. It was the child's father. I feel so left out. Not, oh, my poor kid was sick and didn't have mommy.
Really speaks to the selfishness these guys feel, for sure. But there was also one thing that you said that I wanted to kind of touch on. It was just that these people don't have the self-awareness because they've never challenged themselves, or they've never looked inwards and seen, I'm being a shit and I haven't been called on it. And we can take some hope too in that sometimes just by talking to these people, you can start to make them do that a little bit more. You can start to make people look a little more closely at these things that are going on around them and realize, oh, hey, maybe you're right. I never really looked at it that way, but maybe you're right. I've been doing it a lot at my work. I've been talking to people a lot about the things that we talk about on the show, about the things that I see, the things that I'm writing about in school. And I've had more people come up and start talking to me about the things that they've been seeing in their own lives now. Like workers who have had men in their lives similarly face false accusations, things like that. People who are in their own classes and they're encountering the SJW logic that they're having a hard time swallowing now. But it's really important to be saying these things to people, to be trying to point out to them, do you see where that logic might not be quite so sound? Because if you can do that, you can start to plant seeds in their minds, and you can start to help them to kind of challenge these thoughts that might have been otherwise unchallenged in their minds. And I think it's a really important process to be doing that.
Yeah.
So I really, really encourage more people to do that wherever possible.
You know, and the other thing that would be wise, especially like if you're out there and you're raising a daughter, the vaccination against the identity, the victim identity cult disease, the thing that will help build an immunity in your daughter against that disease, is to let her face the music when she does things that she shouldn't do. Where, you know, if your kid is like I was when I was 5, and her curiosity is bigger than her brain, and she sticks her foot in hot coals and gets third-degree burns on all the calluses that she has built up from running around a gravel driveway in her bare feet. And you know, you go through the medical part of it, and you treat the problem and make sure the child is not going to die from having third-degree burns on the bottom of her foot. Once it's all over, it is not bad at all to say to her, well, you won't do that again, will you? What did you learn from the experience? You know, think before you take action on something. Just because you're curious doesn't mean it's a good idea to actually test it that way.
Mind that you don't do that.
Yeah, you could have asked somebody. And yeah, have them think through the process. What would you do now if you had this to do all over again? You're coming down the alley and your dad's in the living room in the house, and you see these hot coals and you want to know if they're hot. What else could you do to find out if they're hot besides stick your foot in them? You know,
I had that moment when I was like 6.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if the burner was on the coil burner on the stove was still hot after it wasn't red anymore.
Oh.
So I touched it. I touched it, and as soon as it wasn't red, I touched it, and then like I really regretted it. And my mom was like, "What a dumb thing to do! Don't you feel stupid now?"
Yeah.
Right. And my dad was like, "Okay, if you have to walk around with because I had to like literally walk around with my hand up, to keep the blood out of it in order to keep it from throbbing, right?" So I literally spent 2 days with my hand raised above my head to keep
Oh no!
Did you have to go to school that way?
Yeah, I did.
Karen, did you have the answer? No, my hand just hurts.
Well,
Can you try?
And it was just like, you know, you just got to live with the consequences. My mom was a big one for living with the consequences. My dad was a big one for if there's no blood, it doesn't hurt. My mom, the same, right? And, you know, like I remember she was out working in the backyard. They were big gardeners, right? My parents, right? And big home renovators and landscapers, DIY landscapers. And so my mom was out turning soil with the spade, and she's doing it in her bare feet because she's like me. I demolished a wet bar in my bare feet once, and you know, all those nails and stuff, whatever, just walk over them. It's fine. But anyhow, so she was doing this in her bare feet, and she put the spade through her, the edge of her big toe. And she's like, seriously bleeding, and so my dad's standing at the end of the driveway talking with the neighbor, right? And they're just shooting the shit. And my mom goes, and she just quietly goes, and she sits on the front porch, and she's not going to go in because she's going to bleed on the carpet, and she doesn't want to clean that up. So she's sitting on the front porch, and then she finally, after about 5 minutes of watching them talk, and neither of them have noticed her, right? She's like, honey. And he's like, what? And she's, you might want to come here and have a look at this. I think I might need to go get stitches. And he's like, oh my God, woman. Right. And comes over and has a look and is okay. I guess I could probably drive you to go get stitches. But, it's like my dad had a transmission fall out of a vehicle and land on his hand and bend his thumb completely back against his wrist.
No.
And he finished his shift.
Wow.
Yeah.
He popped his thumb back into its joint and finished his shift. And then like a month later, he's like, why is my thumb still tingling? Right.
Oh man.
And he came home from work one day after so 2 hours before the end of the day, he's dealing with a truck, and a shard of metal shoots out of the fan belt and gets him in the eye. And it's like embedded in his pupil. And he, in his cornea, right in his pupil. And so he finishes his shift, and then he drives home. And then he goes to wash the grease out of his fingerprints like he always did. And my mom is like, Karen, your dad is taking so long washing up. What's going on? Go find out what he's doing. And so I go into their bedroom, into the ensuite bathroom that they had. And he's there trying to pull this shard of metal out of his eye with needle nose tweezers, right? And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, you're just doing what you do, right? His apprentice once stitched together his hand, gave himself stitches. So it's like you're looking at things that like in my experience as a child growing up, these would be like completely, that whole thing, that whole story where there was a man who was out cutting down trees on his own. He was clearing up clear cuts, right? Because you can scavenge clear cuts to some degree in some places and salvage those logs and take them, right? But after the logging company has had their way with them. So he was out there in the middle of nowhere cutting down trees, and a tree landed on him and landed on his leg. And he ended up taking out a penknife and amputating the lower half of one of his legs with the penknife because there was nobody who knew where he was. And then he drove himself into town. He, used his belt as a tourniquet and drove himself into town after having amputated his own leg because that was the only way he thought that he would be able to survive that. And he was probably right. Otherwise, he would have just died out in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, I'm looking at things that, my grandmother and my mother and my father and my father's dad were subjected to. And I'm thinking, the stuff that we whine about these days.
Yeah.
Well,
is
no kidding.
Pretty fucking pathetic.
Embarrassing.
And then we end up, of course, with people who can't get past the idea that they are victims of everything because of that. We have, and even just the idea that because women have always been the gatekeeper of sex, women have always been the one that have to be asked and have their
control
their
the old dance, the
right?
whole dance, and
Right.
and have
Right.
veto power. Yeah.
The moment they are asked to consider their partner as a human being involved in a mutually engaged act with another human being, they are victim now. that does come from, to a degree, that coddling, and to a degree, that identity. And that coddling makes the identity worse. And that really the vaccine for dads out there, for moms out there listening, if you want to spare your daughter the experience of being so fragile and so easily traumatized that she can feel victimized or made unsafe by the presence of a person who has different ideas than she does in her classroom, or at a convention she's attending, at an expo maybe that she's attending, or that she might actually feel faint watching a video where such ideas are expressed or portrayed. If you want to spare your daughter that level of fragility, raise her to think of people, other people of both sexes, as human beings from the time she's little. Raise her to recognize that when she does something selfish and somebody else gets hurt, that her actions that led to that are her fault, and any reparations that can be made are her responsibility. That when she climbs the tree, the walnut tree outside the kitchen that you told her not to climb, and shakes the walnuts out of it, and one of them goes through Mr. Lehman's window next door, and it's up to her to work for minimum wage until she has earned enough money to pay to have that window replaced, just like you would your son. Because otherwise, you are going to raise an adult child. And that's what I'm seeing in the victim identity cult, is that the women who become a part of that cult are generally adult children. And this is not something that is unique to feminism. It's feminist women have their brand of victim identity culthood, and women who are non-feminist but are not necessarily awakened to the dysfunctionality of modern gynocentrism, they have their victim identity cult as well. The women who argue that that basically getting paid to be sexy victimizes a woman, those women are their own victim identity cult. And that includes women who are feminist, and it includes women who are anti-feminist, who are religious, who are traditionalist. They act like if a woman decides to strip for money, she is being used and exploited, even though she is using and exploiting men's sexuality to get that money. That if a woman goes into porn, that she's being used and exploited, even though she is, again, using and exploiting men's sexuality to get that money. That is the identity cult. And so, yeah, if you really want to immunize your daughter from this cult, that's what you have to do. You have to raise her with a level of personal accountability and mindfulness that you want to impart to a boy. But I want to get into the super chats because we have a shitload of them.
I just before you get into the super chats, I just want to say, Mr. Rusty, you deserve to get worms. But any woman who tells you you're going to get worms from eating raw cookie dough just wants to eat all the cookie dough herself.
Yeah, no, you don't get worms from eating raw cookie. You get worms from eating raw beef. You get trichinosis from eating raw pork. And no, that is not a superpower for your nose. It's really nasty parasite. But you don't get worms from eating raw cookie dough, but you can get salmonella from eating raw cookie dough. So yeah, no, I would still not eat raw cookie dough, and she shouldn't either. But people do. So anyway, we have.
Well, if it's fresh cookie dough. If it's fresh cookie dough that you have just made, there is really very, very little risk.
Well, or you could get those nasty-ass pasteurized eggs to make it with. And,
ew, gross.
Yeah.
They all taste like fish.
Yeah.
But if you make the cookie dough and then you eat some of it before you put the cookies in. But if you put it in the fridge and store it for a while, you're looking for trouble. So.
Yeah, conspiracy. So a really bad stomach ache, big deal. You've never had salmonella, have you?
Oh boy, it's
okay,
not fun.
so no, I know
going to
I'm not
CC's
doing that.
Pizza
Tomorrow's
again.
Thanksgiving, and I am not giving you guys the salmonella story tonight because it's bad.
All I know is just try being 7 months pregnant with your first child and bowing to the porcelain god for 12 hours.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
vomiting your guts out because you ate something that was, and it wasn't, and here's the really horrible thing about that, because it's usually the thing that you ate like between 12 and 17 hours
ago.
prior.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, it's not the thing that you just most recently ate. So what I had most recently eaten was basmati rice, which I will not touch.
Oh, no.
I will not, because it's just it was so unpleasant coming back up. It has quite a texture to it. It's quite firm. And and it was horrible. And
I was
halibut.
trying to spare everybody this kind of thing, my story's still worse.
It almost turned me off halibut. And I still don't know what actually made me sick.
Yeah.
Everybody in the house was sick, so it was something that we all ate, some kind of freaking bologna sandwiches or some shit, right? The day before, right? Or that for lunch or something like that. And then so that all went through and came out
that's
hind end.
Really enough detail, Karen. We got people complaining in the chat.
and then everything we ate afterwards came out the front end.
Yeah, salmonella poisoning is bad. This is why like, and you have two people who have worked in food service, maybe three. I don't know, Prim, if you've ever done it, but we know food safety methods.
Yep,
and
we sure have.
Like
5 years.
So like all of us are like fully aware of what happens to cause this, and the idea you just don't eat raw eggs and raw meat that have not been properly handled and kept cold.
You can get salmonella though from so you had a field of watermelon, right, that were ripe, ready for the picking,
and a lizard ran over one of them.
No, at some point a flock of Canada geese flew over the field and shit all over all of it, right? And then nobody told you that the rinds of these watermelons were covered with goose shit, right? So then you cut through them because you don't want to pull the partially cut up watermelon out every time a kid wants watermelon. No, you cut up the whole watermelon, you put it in a container and put it in the fridge, right? And so then, oh my goodness, every time you put the knife through the skin of the watermelon, you've dragged the salmonella through the flesh of the watermelon, and you've just contaminated the entire fucking thing.
Yep.
And now you're fucked.
So Ohio has actually had outbreaks. We've been hit with it in ground turkey. We've been hit in whole turkey, ground beef. What else? Romaine lettuce was another one. And the weirdest was a particular brand of cake mix that you don't have to add anything to but water to cook. So it has powdered eggs in it. Yeah. Yeah. All in the last couple of weeks, and everybody's all So yeah, well, the problem is it can be solved by washing the outside of the watermelon. Everybody thinks I'm weird. Well, we don't have watermelon in our house because of food allergies, but everybody thinks I'm weird for washing things like that. But washing makes a big difference with a lot of foods. So we do that. It's that mindfulness. You learn this thing, and it doesn't make you a germaphobe to be aware of food safety and actually use it at home because you know it anymore. It doesn't make you a germaphobe to be a trained nurse's aide and come home and use universal precautions because you learned about that as well. But that just goes back to that mindfulness. But off of the topic of food poisoning,
yes,
because that's, like I said, my story, everything that you've talked about there, I have two stories that are worse, and I'm not going to tell you either of them today because they're just that gross. So, in fact, I might have to make them its own separate video with a trigger warning. And if people want to watch it, they can. And if people don't want to know, they don't have to. But we have, at the beginning of the show, we have Master Rogue gave us $2 and said, Prim! Huggy face, heart, smiley face. And then we have Hokey Bukisa gave us 1984. And I can't read the thing he said because it's not words. So he said, let's see if I can show this, find a way to show this. I gotta open the video window properly. It's gone to the default lock screen, which is kind of weird. So see if this shows in the video window. There we go. This is what Hokey Bukisa said here. It looks like he's lifting weights. I'm assuming that that's what that is. So if I'm incorrect...
He's angry and flipping tables.
Oh, is he flipping tables? I don't know what we were talking about. But yeah. Oh, Ergo Proxy 12345 says, Hannah, make it a shill video where people need to send money to know what's next. There we go. I shall live stream the greatness of my food poisoning experiences for super chats sometime. But so there was Hokey Bukisa's table flip and super chat. Then we have Miles Kinslow gave us $20 and said, hey guys, I noticed Monica Lewinsky is in the news. Yeah, she is. Would she qualify as a #MeToo? And my answer to that is yes and no. No.
She only willingly put his dick in her mouth.
Yeah, exactly. No, in that she is not a victim. I'm sick and tired of hearing that Monica Lewinsky she is not a victim of Bill Clinton. She is not a victim of the Sex Act. She's not a victim of the choice to seek out. She literally sought him out. She went to the White House to get, I think, what did she call it, her presidential wings or something like that. She chose that.
She had always maintained throughout the entire thing, even when the feminist establishment vilified her because because Bill Clinton would give them what they wanted on abortion, and all of those things, right? She maintained that the entire relationship was completely consensual, that she was an active participant in it. She actively sought out that relationship with him, all of those things. But 6 months ago, something like that, she started to rethink it. She started to think, there was a power imbalance, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so let's reconcile the Me Too notion that a power imbalance, right, where the woman is subordinate to the man, means that the woman's consent is always vitiated under law or under, norms or whatever you want to call it, right? That a woman who is subordinate to a man or has less status than he does, right? That she can never actually give valid consent because of his higher status and his ability to coerce her using his higher status if he wanted to. Okay, so this is the argument, right? Is that he could force her, and she would have to go along with it, and therefore her yes means nothing, right? Because her no would also mean nothing, right? And so this is the argument. But how do we reconcile this with the fact that women are attracted to men of higher status than they are?
Well, and that's just
we're literally saying to women, you can never legally, if anytime you have sex with the man you are attracted to, you are facilitating a criminal act against yourself.
Yeah, and even if there was that idea that or even if that idea was had some weight, that a guy, just by virtue of having some sort of power, just by virtue of
That's
being
why
desirable
Louis
or
C.
being, you know, all that.
That's
Just
why
by
Louis
virtue of that, even if it was true,
apologized.
right? Even if it was true, even if women just couldn't say no after being approached by a guy of that degree of power, it still wouldn't affect Monica Lewinsky's situation, because specifically she talked to people before she got the internship at the White House saying she was going there to seduce the president. This was premeditated. You are not a victim of your own premeditated actions.
Yes, you are, because even though he didn't hit on her, even though he didn't offer her sex,
the pride penis
he was of higher status, and therefore he got into her brain, without even knowing who she was.
The pride penis of Washington forced that poor innocent girl to get that job.
He literally ejaculated all over her prefrontal cortex and forced her to make the decision to go and seek sex with him.
Yeah.
Mind control.
But so in terms of what the advocates for Me Too claim Me Too is, Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky doesn't qualify. That disqualifies her, and that she premeditated her seduction of the president.
I think it absolutely does.
Yeah, in terms of what they say it's about, that would disqualify her. Now, in terms of what Me Too actually turned out to be, she is 100% an example. She is totally and completely characteristic of what Me Too actually is. And I know that a lot of the people involved in it really want to treat it like the examples like Lewinsky are the exception, and women who have genuinely been victimized are the rule. And the majority of the tweets that you see to the hashtag, and the majority of the Twitter storm that hit the hashtag when it first came out, was all women who were genuinely victimized. But the reality is, even the day the hashtag first trended, I was seeing stories like hers. I was seeing stories of, using my biology against me and all that stuff. That was from the first day, from the moment that hashtag trended, from the moment that people started having a tantrum about Weinstein. There were women who were comparing having a man speak to them on the bus to being brutally raped in a dark alley by a complete stranger. And there were women comparing having regrets over sex acts that they had engaged in to being held down and forced against their will. And it was never, the Me Too movement was never limited to real victims who had been through real trauma, who had been genuinely taken advantage of and genuinely harmed and genuinely denied any kind of recourse or repercussions for the person that harmed them. So she's an example. She is totally characteristic of Me Too.
I would say she's quintessential.
Yeah.
In terms of the retroactive retracting of consent.
Hell, even the Weinstein victims aren't all victims. Even the Weinstein women, there are several instances that have come out where, the woman had exchanged emails back and forth with him and said she loved him and all this stuff after the alleged incident. There's one that released a video to show what a victim she was, and in the video he asks for her consent, and she gives it. Can I flirt with you? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. Is this too much? No, I want you to stop. And he stops. Then he goes back to the previous level of where she had consented to. And they could go back and forth like that. At no point does she say, I'm really uncomfortable with this. This is bothering me. I'm not sure I like it. I don't want to do this. Nothing. And she shows up dressed attractively, not just professionally, but, to show a little leg, to show a little cleavage, bare arms all the way up to her shoulders. and he's in a suit. Like, it's for a business thing. And yeah, so I like the dynamics of that. It's pretty clear that this was a part of business for him, that he dealt with business this way. This was with women, and his behavior, I would say, was out of line in terms of the business environment. But she never said that to him, and she showed up prepared to take advantage of that in order to get him to do business with her and her company. And then she turned around and acted like that was all one-sided. And
well,
it's not one-sided, and she's not a victim.
That's the thing that I brought up. I've brought up a bunch of times since the Me Too thing came out, particularly in my talk interviews, spots on talk radio, right? Is that the casting couch exists, and the casting couch exists because both men and women consent to it, right? There are both men and women who consent to using sex to get ahead in their careers, and that transaction, I don't think that transaction is anything that anybody needs to be concerned about in terms of the law or in terms of anything like that, right? But what happens is you have women who are willing to, or who initiate the transaction of, here, let me have sex in exchange for something that I want, right? That does not mean that every woman who finds herself in a casting call is consenting to that, right? And so essentially that the women who engage in that willingly and even eagerly, right, in order to get ahead, in order to trade sex for something that is of benefit to them, right, they make it so that it's more difficult for women who would not do that to say no, because it's expected if they want to, because now it's expected, right? And so essentially what you have is, it's not a culture that's created by only men in power who want to exploit women. It's also created by women who actually are exploiting men through the transaction of sex for favors given in return, right? And who do that willingly with their eyes wide open, right? And all of that, right? And they are actually making it difficult for women who would say no to that proposition to say no. And so, like, the whole thing is a whole lot more complicated than Me Too is leading us all to believe.
Well, and honestly, if it wasn't such a one-sided thing, where all of the accountability, all the responsibility in terms of this action happened, and the person who is deemed to have been at fault for this action happening is always going to be the guy. If it wasn't so one-sided, that could be something that is open and well known, that in this studio we have a casting couch, and if you want to work in this studio, there's the casting couch. If you don't want to deal with a casting couch, this other studio over here doesn't have one. And it exists specifically because of the people that don't want to deal with a casting couch. Okay, that would be fine, right? That the studios that would be successful would be the ones the most people were interested in, and the ones who the most talent worked with. And if it turns out that people are more interested in getting ahead that way, you're probably going to see more of the true talent go the other way. Go to the studio where they don't have to you go to the casting couch. They don't have to deal with a casting couch. But it's not that way. It's not upfront. It's not open and honest, and it's not there's no responsibility for the women who go along with it. And so there's no responsibility to communicate it publicly. It's under the table. It's behind closed doors. And it can't be dealt with as a fact of life. It has to be dealt with as a shameful little secret that nobody admits is going on, and it takes years and years to deal with it. And when it is finally dealt with, the entire thing is not dealt with. Only the guy's part of the interaction is dealt with, and that's what we're
Well,
seeing right now with Weinstein. But
she was offering him stuff, and he should have not taken it, because that was an abuse of power. And it's like, honestly, like the Weinstein thing is falling apart. It is like many of the charges are falling apart. They're like unraveling, because essentially, when you look at something that's an open secret, right, and that when you look also at the fact that, who was it, Rose McGowan, who was, after he allegedly sexually assaulted her, she entered into something like a 4-year relationship with him.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, but I'm just not buying it. I'm not buying it, right? You entered into a relationship with him. You benefited from what he could do for you because, in exchange for that relationship, right? And then he was done and dumped you, and now you're like, well, where the fuck am I? I'm just some crazy woman with a shaved head who can't fucking speak. She can't fucking put two coherent sentences together, right? That's what you are. Like, I was blown away. I was blown away by her saying that, being photographed on the red carpet was like being eye raped.
Yeah, that's
or
insane.
Raped by the cameras. And I'm thinking to myself, you wore fucking dental floss
Yeah.
to a Hollywood event. Like, we could see your ass crack, your nipples, everything, right? You wore that, right? You posed. You arched your back. You pushed your tits out. You held your shoulders back to make your boobs more, accentuated.
Oh yeah, that active participation.
You did all of those things in that fucking thing. Like, would I wear that dress? No.
If I was
would
built
not.
like that, I might, but I'm not, and nobody wants to see that. So
even if I was fucking built like that, I would never have worn anything like that. Like, I will wear jeans that have a hole in the crotch, right? And all of that stuff, right? As long as I'm covered up, as long as all of the relevant bits are covered up by something, I'm fine, right? But I would never put myself on display in that way. And then to say I put myself on display and people were eating it up, and that's
and
like
I'm a victim of that.
That's like a stripper saying, I'm a victim of the men in the club looking at me while I pole dance.
Yeah, and see, that's just it. I don't have any problem with, like, you show up in dental floss, okay, you stick your tits out, that's fine, that's your business. If you fuck everything that moves for money, that's your business, literally business, right? But don't pretend that you're a victim of it. If you choose to do those things, I chose to work in retail. And in a lot of ways, I consider that to have been a lower position in terms of the respect and consideration that people are willing to give people on the basis of their profession. I think probably hookers and strippers and porn stars get more respect than the people that work behind a cash register at a gas station, because I don't think anybody goes into their workplace. I don't think anybody goes into their workplace and smears shit.
I'm gonna say that.
And hey, Karen, I'm here. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying was, I think people who work in a gas station get less respect for their jobs, their profession, what they do, than hookers and strippers and porn stars, because nobody goes into their place of work. Nobody goes into the sex worker's place of work necessarily and smears shit all over the wall once a week, every week, because they're just assholes, right? Nobody goes in there and leaves tampons in the sink. Nobody goes in there and tries to flush supersized maxi pads that I don't know where the hell they got something that thick down the toilet, and that you have to fish it out with your gloved hands. and put it in the trash, right? So this idea
I would also
that
add
these women are victims of choosing to do these jobs. This idea that your identity, because you chose to make your sexuality your profession, rather than your physical labor your profession, and your time your profession, that you chose to make your sexuality your profession, that you're a victim of that choice. That infuriates me. And they don't get robbed at hookers do. Hookers get robbed at gunpoint.
Yeah, okay, but I would also say that when you work in a convenience store or some other thing, a restaurant maybe, right? Nobody's coming into the restaurant or the convenience store because you're there.
Right.
Right?
No, they're coming there because
you
the goods
could be
are there.
replaced. You could be replaced by anybody or by a machine that does the same work that you could do if there was a machine that could do it.
Your management has no qualms about telling you that every day.
Yeah,
they will make you feel like shit for it.
Yeah, but when you are a prostitute or a stripper or whatever, some kind of sex worker, you are the product, right? Like when you work at a gas station, the gasoline is the product. You are just like a conduit.
Are the product.
Yeah, you're like a conduit that facilitates the customer being able to get the product, right? But when you are a performer of some sort, whether it's a performer in sexual, erotic dancing, whatever, right? Or sex work or acting or whatever, you are the product, right? And yeah, that comes with a lot of, like, as somebody who does what I do, like I am largely the product. Like I am disseminating information, but I am part of the product, and I have to live with that, and I have to deal with the fact that puts me in a unique position. It puts me in a position that's different from if I'm waiting tables or if I'm working retail or if I'm, doing landscaping or whatever, right? I am the product. Well, that being the product is actually humanizing, not dehumanizing, right? The people who are actually being dehumanized are, to some degree, the person who brought the pizza to my house via Skip the Dishes Tonight, the people who stand behind the counter at your convenience store, the people who run the cash registers at the Walmart, right? All of those people, those are the ones who are, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter to you if X person was there rather than Y person was there behind the cash register running your groceries through. Wouldn't matter to you.
Exactly. And so this idea, this victim narrative that hashtag Me Too has created, and this victim identity cult that it is perpetuating, and specifically her victim identity, they're all illusions that people are living in. When I talked about this as a delusion, delusions of persecution on Twitter and everything, it really offended the person that I was talking to. But that is exactly what it is. They're trapping people inside a persecution delusion. So yeah, in short, again, Monica Lewinsky is not a victim. She does not qualify as what they say Me Too is about, but she is absolutely 100% quintessential Me Too. She is completely characteristic of it. Hoki Bukisa gave us $5 and said, Hannah, you want to see an SJW blue screen and reject her victimhood assertion. I do that on Twitter all the time. Make sure you're recording, though. Poo will hit the ceiling. And that is something that I've watched happen over and over again as well. And like, I've had everything from being told I must be a man because I couldn't possibly say the things I say if I was a woman, being told that I couldn't have experienced the things I've experienced in my life because if I did, I would know it's totally not like the way I experienced them. And being told that my experience of my experiences, I'm the only person that has ever recovered from the things that I've recovered from. Everybody else that has experienced them is crippled for life. And all of the other people that comment in the thread saying, no, I've experienced those things too and I wasn't crippled, are fake accounts. You know,
yeah, they're all men too.
Yeah,
or
they're all
Russians
men
or something.
Oh yes, I'm also a Russian bot, just so you guys
Oh,
know.
nice.
And the funniest one that I got, though, I think had to be the one I actually, somewhere on my computer, I have an image from this that I labeled it my dick, because this woman responded to something I said that with a tweet saying that the next prostitute I visit should cut it off. And just so I would know how it feels to be a woman. So yeah. So I've been threatened with having anatomy removed that I don't have. So there you go. And that's exactly what happens. They just lose their shit. They really do. You question the victim identity, and you become a threat, and they become aggressive. I Am Not a Penguin gave us £5 gave us £5 and said, please check out Cinematic Venom, one of the only movie review channels not following the SJW line, and he's having trouble getting videos noticed. Okay, so I will check that out when I get a chance, but everybody else, remember that is Cinematic Venom. Mr. Roboto gave us $5 and said, women have 3 veils of virginity. Virtue, 3 veils: virginity, virtue, victimhood. The first, purity; the second, that which her values, ethics, morals; the third, her vulnerableness, and her worth, she to say. I'm guessing what he's saying is her worth is wrapped up in those veils, and that makes sense. And I've seen that women have their value wrapped up in purity, and when their purity is gone, if they don't have virtue, or if they haven't got an understanding of their virtue, the only thing left is victimhood, and that makes them vulnerable to the victimhood cult. So build virtue in your children. Hoki Bukisa gave us $2 and said, Karen, that's called paternalism. That was at 8:51, so that would have been, I think, shortly after Alison left. We were still talking about the victim identity. Interesting. T-Gang gave us $2. I don't know what the A stands for, so I don't know what country that is.
Australia, maybe?
Australia, maybe? Yeah. Karen is so cute when she's angry.
I am not cute. Fuck you.
Oh, telling a woman she's cute when she's angry. I think I'm the only woman that's actually a cure for
I
my
will
anger.
fucking cut your dick off. I will cut your dick off.
Hey, I'm glad I didn't tell her she was cute when she was
me.
angry. I've already had some other woman threaten to cut my dick off.
I wouldn't actually.
First.
I wouldn't actually cut anybody's dick off. But
There we go.
there you go.
Unless it talked for too long, and then you're like, nope, You're cut off. You have to shut up now.
Yeah, well, okay, there you go. I was feeling testy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, feeling testes can be kind of fun. Anyway.
It can. Feeling testes is very, very fun. Also, could you please stop with the puns?
No, I cannot. It's a disease.
Okay. You know what? My guy, he surfs this freaking these bunch of stupid subreddits, right? Okay, like our wholesome memes and our puns and our freaking dad jokes and shit. Then he reads them out to me, and infuriated. He's like, I'm like trying to write some kind of treatise on like coverture laws of the 1800s, right? And he's like, hey, Karen, listen to this. I'm really shocked that nobody's found a cure for anorexia yet, I'd have thought it'd be a piece of cake.
Yeah, but that wouldn't cure
And that
all
just makes me
anorexia.
want to stab him in the face.
That wouldn't cure all anorexia, though. It would only cure non-feminist anorexia, because feminists don't understand cake. Then we have I think that's Circade Flora.
Syria de Flora looks like.
Syria de Flora, you're right. I'm seeing a C in there where it isn't. I love being dyslexic. Gave us $5 and said, my nephew is only 2 years old. I fear every day he will be accused of something when he starts school in a few years. I hope we can change it soon. This stuff's been going on for more than 20 years. And believe it or not, my son managed to get through his entire elementary through high school years without being accused of anything like that. Part of it is I did not pull any punches. He's aware. He knows. I guess you could call him the woke 8-year-old everybody talks about. Well, when he was 8 years old, my son knew to be mindful of how people were interacting with him, and not to just trust that everybody was on the up and up, essentially. And you hate to do that. You hate to raise a kid to be anything but innocent, but it's the same thing as you teach a child to understand and establish and communicate their boundaries. That has to be a social thing as well. It's not just their physical boundaries. It's not just sexual boundaries. It's everything boundaries, and that helps. You don't necessarily have to teach a 2-year-old that every girl around him is some kind of a threat, but you can teach a child that if somebody lies to them and they know that somebody lied to them, that they may not want to trust that person later on, to be honest. You can teach a child to be aware of logic fallacies. That just because somebody they're arguing with turns around and says, well, you're a poopy duty head, that doesn't mean they won the argument. That means that they lost the argument. Just because somebody that they're talking to says, well, you only think that way because you're Joe's friend and Joe said that that's true, that doesn't counter the thing that they've said they believe. And your kid being able to deal with irrational arguments, being able to deal with liars, being able to deal with the tattling environment and that kind of thing, knowing, understanding boundaries, and understanding that not everybody handles boundaries the same way, and not everybody understands boundaries the same way, and they have to be mindful of that when they're going through school. They can still go through school normally. They can still have their group of friends. They can still play on the playground and have a great time, and be a fun, loving, patient person without being vulnerable due to ignorance of the circumstances under which they are going to school.
Well, I would add to that, like what the advice that I give to every parent who asks, how do I deal with the situation with my boys in school? I just tell them the example of my boy who, came home. He was super excited. He was super pumped because he got detention. Right. And his adrenaline was still going because of the thing that got him detention, which was, somebody was picking on there were a couple of older boys who were picking on a friend of his and getting physical. And he jumped in and started swinging. The door crashed open. It was like way later than he should have gotten home. And I'm like, why are you late? And he said, I got detention. And I said, why? And he says, because I got into a brawl. And I was like, okay, so explain to me how that happened. And he's like, well, my friend was being picked on and pushed around by a couple of older boys, and then I just jumped in and started swinging, and then I accidentally kicked my friend in the nuts. And
That's not.
And I was like,
it's not helpful.
I was like, well, that doesn't sound too great for him. And I'm like,
Oh.
and I'm like, oh, he's like, yeah, but like, and I'm like, okay, so how do you feel about that? And he's like, it was fun. And I'm like, okay, I can accept that, right? Like you saw somebody in trouble, you intervened on your own. That's great. You're an 8-year-old boy and you jumped in, like rushing into a burning building and rescuing someone's cat or whatever, right? Like you took it upon yourself, right? That's fine. Okay, so and then okay, so are you gonna have detention more? And he says, no, well, I have to fill this stuff out if I don't want more detention, right? Me and you, we have to fill this stuff out. And it was this thing that was like it was this form, you know, what did you do wrong? What would you do differently next time? Blah 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 blah, right? And I just said, okay, so I'm just going to tell you what you have to write in order to not get more detention, right? But I'm not expecting you to like do this, right? What did I do wrong? I intervened on my own. What would I do differently next time? Go get an adult, right? All go tattle essentially, and all of those things, right? You know, I was like, I don't have any problem with what you did. I have no problem whatsoever with what you saw somebody who was in a situation where they were in crisis and you intervened, you took it upon yourself. I think that's great. That's wonderful. That's what I would love to see everybody do, right? When that comes up, right? But here's the shit that you're going to have to feed your teacher and your principal in order to like get out of detention. So here, let's construct our lies, right? And
Yeah.
you know, and just write them out. And you know, yeah, next time I would not intervene on my own. Next time I will go get an adult. Blah 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 blah, right? And yeah, and there you go, because you literally have to be honest with your kid in terms of what the school expects of him and what the school is going to hold him accountable for. It's going to hold him accountable for things that you would not.
Yeah.
You would not punish him for those things, but the school will. You would not. The young girl who pushed my son, there was a big pile of plowed snow, really packed snow that was like in chunks piled up from our parking lot in the townhouse complex that we lived in at the time. And they were playing on it, which they should not have been, which I did scold him for. You should not have been up on top of that pile of snow. It was 15 feet up, right? But she tried to push him off. And she actually did push him off. He managed to scooch down on his bum rather than go ass over tea kettle to the bottom. But he was mad because she pushed him down off of it, and he threw a chunk of packed snow up at her. And then I got a woman, this girl's mother, knocking on my door, accusing my son of attacking her daughter.
I can go one further on that. I had a
and like he had come home crying because he was like that's scary fucking like surviving a 15-foot freaking on a steep slope that's made up of like super hard freaking packed snow, right? So he made it down and he came running home and he was very, very upset after he'd thrown the piece of snow at her. And so he was quite upset and he told me all about it. And I was like, oh, geez, well, you shouldn't have been up there. And then she comes and knocks on my door and is like, your son did this to my daughter. And I'm like, you can fuck right off.
Your daughter tried to kill my son. No, my brother, when he was in the 4th grade, had a girl decide she liked him. And of course, her way of showing it, because she was an immature little brat, was to kick him and chase him at recess and push him and all kinds of stuff. And this is a 4th grader. right? So she's 10 years old. Her mother sent her to school. This is in a small town, 8,000 people, farm community, factory workers, stuff like that. Sent a 10-year-old child to school in pants that in 1984 or 1982, somewhere around there, they cost $50. I don't have pants that cost $50 now, right? But this kid had pants that cost $50 that she went to elementary school in, where she was going to have 3 recesses and gym class. And her mother contacts my mother to complain that while her daughter was repeatedly assaulting my little brother, who couldn't hit back because she was a girl, and so chose to run away from her because that was his only other option, that because he ran away from her and she had to chase him, the fact that she fell down and ripped her $50 pants was his fault, and my mother owed her $50. That was, I think, the only time I heard my mother cuss when I was in elementary school. And I learned, and I think the other woman, she got more of a vocabulary lesson in terms of words related to accountability, but I think my mother used the C word. My mother called her a cunt, and like, I had never heard her call anybody anything like that before. She used the word assault too. She did not pull any punches. She didn't, like, she gave her the riot act, like sock it to the Harper Valley PTA riot act, right down to what kind of brain bleeding moron sends a 10-year-old to school in $50 pants, you know, much less buys pants for somebody that's going to grow out of them in a year, and spends that much money on them. That is insane. It is your business if you're going to do that. It's not my responsibility to fund your daughter's assault on my son. And that was the end of that. She didn't do that anymore. And this was one of those cute little girls that has her middle name is part of her name. You can't just say her first name. You know, it's a 2-syllable first name and then a second middle name. Yeah, and so she sounds like a country music star, right? So you know how spoiled she was, but that was, my mom was like not having that. The only thing that she came close to conceding on was not having the woman whose son bullied my brother and me and our buddy over the Halloween candy pay for my brother's ruined pants after my brother broke his nose. But that was because, you know, they did start the fight. They should be covering that. We didn't go out trick-or-treating expecting or hoping to be mugged for our candy. But yeah, it's just, no, I mean, it's just nuts.
The issue is, right, like, you need to, like, lay it out for your son, right? You know, here's how other people are going to treat you.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I did that with homework, actually.
Yeah, and here's
the reality of life.
Yeah, and here's how things actually work. And, you know, like, in some ways it's unfair and, you know, like, fine, things being on, but in other ways, if you're going to get suspension or detention or something like that over something that's completely fucking stupid, right? I'm just going to help you lie to the authorities to get you out of that detention, because I don't think, you know, like, that's an act of honesty. I don't think you deserve detention for trying to help your friend.
Exactly.
Right? And so, you know, I'm not, but I am going to try to get you out of detention. So here's how we're going to construct this, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's what the school is going to expect of you, right? The next time something like this comes up, this is what is expected. And I hope that you don't conform to that.
Right.
I hope that you stay true to yourself and stay true to your masculine urges of jumping in when there is a need and all of those things, which seems to be a predominantly masculine phenomenon, at least in terms of situations where there's any physical risk.
That's why feminists think female MRAs are men.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is essentially, I want you to keep being who you are. Here's how you can get around the system, is just tell them what they want to hear and just do what you want anyway, within reason. Like that doesn't say that any time that my son has engaged in, or my children have engaged in bad behavior at school, I gave them a freaking free pass. Absolutely not. When there were things that I saw them doing or that were reported to me that they had done that were beyond the pale, absolutely unacceptable, all of those things, I was like, no, like you're getting in more trouble here at home than you got into at school because of that. But there are some social norms that are being pushed right now, particularly pertaining to boys, that I don't agree with, and I'm not going to punish my. It's not going to be the situation that it was when I was a kid, where when I was in elementary school, and I never got the strap. I never got called to the principal's office in elementary school, but I knew people who did, and frequently they were given the option: do you want us to call your parents or do you want the strap? And the answer that the kids always gave was to hold out their hand to take the strap, right? Because they would get it worse at home.
Yeah.
They would get worse punishment at home because the punishments that the school was doling out were in agreement with the feelings of most parents at the time, right? And so if you have a school that says, okay, we're going to like whack your hand really hard with a leather strap as punishment, or we can phone your parents and let them punish you for what you did, and the kid chooses a strap, that means that the parents and the school are in accordance with what they think is acceptable and what they think is appropriate, right? But when you look at what it is now, and just you have some parents who are like, how dare you have sent my son home for hawking a loogie into his teacher's shoe for no reason? Like, what did the teacher do to make my son do that, right? Like, you have those kinds of parents, right, who are just like, I'm going to be an advocate for my child no matter what, right? And then you have other kinds of parents who are like, if the school is punishing you, I'm going to punish you. And then you have these people in between who are like, no, we're actually going to stick with our own ethical framework, and when the school is in accordance with that, then we're gonna go along with that, and when the school is not, we're not going to. And I think that's probably the best way to raise sons within the system, is to make sure that they know, not that you're going to be an advocate for them in every single situation, no matter what they do wrong, but to let them know that you're going to be an advocate in situations that you think are unfairly tilted against them, and you're going to stand up for them in those situations, right?
Yeah.
So you're not an unconditional advocate. That's the worst thing you can do, in my opinion. The worst thing you can do for a kid.
I had a classmate who was schizophrenic, and it manifested early in his childhood, way before it usually hits, or way before it usually becomes obvious enough to be diagnosed. And his schizophrenia created some very severe learning disabilities for him, including reading disabilities and stuff like that. The short version is, because his mother decided that she was going to be the unconditional advocate who didn't allow him to face the music anytime there was a conflict at school, anytime he didn't do what he was supposed to do, anytime he did what he wasn't supposed to do, the school wasn't able to assist her in tracking and assessing his behavior. And it took until 6th or 7th grade, when he, actually I think 7th or 8th grade, when he, actually my mother saw him, witnessed him committing a crime against an animal, at the behest of another person who should have been responsible for him, but instead was using him. And she had to go to the police over the behavior because the behavior was reprehensible. But she went to court on his behalf and argued for him to have a psych eval. And that was how they found out that he was schizophrenic, that he needed psychiatric help, that he actually could learn and could have had the education that he deserved throughout elementary school and junior high had he not been denied better advocacy. And in the end, he became able to do some work, and he read and he finished school. He got his GED in the end. I don't think he got graduated, but in any case, the difference was advocating against unfairness, advocating against unequal treatment, versus nothing he can do or say is wrong. And sometimes when you do that, you cripple your child. You cripple your child's ability to get needed help. And it's not just crippling your child's accountability factor. And that, I've seen that happen with other kids too. So yeah, what Karen's talking about, teaching your child that you're going to be an advocate and when you're going to be an advocate, makes a big difference as well. But I'm going to go on with the super chats because it's 10:30.
Okay. All right.
We have Nunquam Nex gave us $3, but there's no message with it. So thank you, Nunquam Nex. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and said, "No step on Sneck, Hannah." And that's when I was talking about the crossroads.
I will step all over. I will tap dance all over your
that Sneck. Oh, that sounds painful. Catherine Scully gave us $10 Canadian, and because it says CA and that's the postal abbreviation for California, I keep thinking it's $10 Californian.
California.
Yep. Said, "I am a fan and wanted to donate." Thank you very much, Catherine. Another way to do that, if you choose to, again, is feedthebadger.com. We get more of that than we do from YouTube, but it's also always nice to have the message of encouragement. Xeranx gave us $2 and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," and it will be Thanksgiving in an hour and a half here.
No, it won't. It was Thanksgiving.
It's American Thanksgiving.
A month ago. It was Thanksgiving a month ago. Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
You know what?
But
I think we should get to gorge ourselves for the entire month between the Canadian Thanksgiving and the United States Thanksgiving. The whole month should just be a feast holiday, and we can have pumpkin pie every day for the entire holiday. That's my compromise.
All I gotta say is when the first snowfall where I am occurred on September 12th, right? 5 inches that did not go away, other than I guess there was 5 days at the end of September where there was no snow on the ground. You know, we can't have our Thanksgiving in November. It's just not even remotely feasible.
Well, like I said, you start with the Canadian feast, and you just continue feasting until, I don't know, New Year's. New Year's sounds like a good time to stop. Then you start drinking. That's for after the feast. So
you drink through the whole thing.
Yeah, you
drink through the whole thing.
There you go. So that's my holiday compromise.
Did I tell you about my holiday? Okay, this let me give thanks. Give thanks for the Mickey of vodka that mysteriously I found at the top of my driveway, right near my children's bedroom windows. They have their bedrooms in the basement, but they have windows. And I had some computer equipment, old printers and stuff, and I put them outside because they're junk. They're going right, and at the end of the driveway by the house, and we have people picking through our yard, poking through our belongings outside to find things to steal. And wouldn't you know it, one of them apparently had a Mickey of Marushka brand vodka.
So they traded you vodka for the computer?
I think they carried off our old iMac, right? Which is like super fucking heavy.
Jeez.
Right? And was completely dead. It's been dead since a year after I got with my guy, which is like 7 years ago.
There
right?
are collectors that'll buy those.
Yeah, apparently. And so, I mean, like, we were like, okay, all of the information that might possibly be stored on it, including bank account numbers and all of those things, they're all out of date. None of them are valid anymore. So, right? Not a problem. Stick it outside. So there's this guy, apparently, who was digging through all of this stuff to see if he could find something to steal from our yard, like our lawnmower walked away last summer. It was the summer before. And a Mickey of vodka, unopened, just fell out of his pocket. And so I was like, okay, I'll take that.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm grateful.
So you got traded a Mickey of vodka for an old computer.
Computer that I might have to pay to actually dispose of.
Yep. So let's see. Then we had Anth Bobo gave us $5 Canadian, not Californian, that said, as long as women are able to vote, the government will always cater to women and men will not have as many rights. So the one problem with that is the government catered to women and men did not have as many rights before women were able en masse to vote. Women have always had some voting rights, as long as men have had voting rights, except for back when it was just knights voting, back in old England. But
Magna Carta days.
Yeah. But it's not voting that gives women their power. And like, I think Karen's pointed this out too. You could 100% take away the vote, like right down to city council, where women could not vote for their ward councilman. They couldn't vote for a janitor, if there was a city janitor. The dog catcher, right? They couldn't vote for the dog catcher. And women wouldn't lose a modicum of power. They would still have 100% of the political influence they have. Not that voting is meaningless, but that neither men nor women get their political power from voting. Voting is how you decide which leaders are gonna be in office, but both sexes have that capability, and both sexes exercise it with women's benefit in mind.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's essentially like, this idea that women they didn't have a voice before feminism. And it's like, that is so freaking retarded. That women did not have a voice before feminism. Women have always had a voice. They've had a voice, even if the only voice they had was their voice across the pillow. That was a voice that could influence men.
Yeah. Even not actually speaking, women have a voice without saying a single word. All they have to do is physically demonstrate that that something creates an adverse condition for them. And men historically will intervene to alleviate the adverse condition. That is why sexual violence laws throughout history have been for the protection of women. The idea that sexual violence creates an adverse condition specifically for women that is different from what it does to men, that was enough that when men created laws to protect against sexual violence, those laws were geared towards protecting women.
Not even just not even just about sexual violence, because that passage in Deuteronomy, right, where if a man finds a woman, an unmarried virginal woman, and he the word is a word for seize, but that word was used when, describing in the Bible, when describing a woman trying to seduce a man. She seized him, and they are caught. Not he is caught in the act, but they are caught in the act. He will have to pay restitution to her father, and he will marry her, and he will never be able to divorce her, right? So essentially, what we're talking about is the biblical version of the shotgun wedding, that it doesn't say anything about her right to divorce. She can divorce him, right? She still has her right to divorce. He cannot divorce her. He can never, ever, ever, because he transgressed upon her virtue, right? By, I guess, tempting her to the point where she could not resist. And then they were caught. It's the hayloft scenario. It's the, my daddy's got a gun. He's coming up the ladder to the hayloft to catch the couple who are canoodling in the hayloft. And then he runs them to the altar, and he is forced to take responsibility for what he allowed them both to do, right? So what you have there, at least in terms of how the ancient ancient language is interpreted, is a situation where the woman could have seduced the man.
Yep.
And now he's
stuck to take responsibility.
He's stuck marrying her and never being able to divorce her, right? And paying restitution to her family. So, like we're looking at all of that stuff, right? The sexual violation of women has always, 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 always been a big deal, right? And the sexual violation of men was like just mentioned in passing in the story of Lot and his daughters, who plied him with enough wine to get him so drunk he wasn't conscious, and then had sex with him so that they could be impregnated with his children and carry on his line without him even knowing. That just seemed to happen, and there was nothing that really came of that. At least there was no punishment, or
they were castigated, and that's it, basically, if I remember right. There wasn't I don't know. The taboo there wasn't that they did something
had
to him
sex
against
with
his
a man.
will. The taboo was that it was incestuous.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So yeah, the idea that women having their voting rights removed, you could do that. Not that it's likely to ever happen in real life, but theoretically you could do that, and nothing would change. Nothing at all would change. Campaigning would still be all based on, here's what we're going to do for women. Here's what we're going to do for your wives. Here's what we're going to do for your daughters. Here's what we're going to do for your mothers. That's where it would go. And men would be voting based on what was going to benefit the women in their lives. And the people, the progressives who created the welfare system that has gone so horribly wrong, and the conservatives whose supposed reform efforts ended up screwing things up so badly for non-custodial fathers, were all men. And they were all men that were trying to do what they thought was going to benefit women the most. And at the least cost to the government, which actually ended up making things more expensive for the government. So in any case, yeah, I know that women didn't earn their voting rights properly. Women didn't earn their voting rights the way that men earned their voting rights. And women do not have the accountability that men have in terms of voting rights. But the belief that the current system is screwed up the way it is because of who has voting rights is incorrect.
It's because incomplete.
It's partly because our entire society is gynocentric, and they don't think things through. We have
Yeah,
the issue
like,
of compassion, emotional compassion versus practical compassion. Everybody is busy dealing in emotional compassion, where you give the woman a fish, rather than practical compassion, where you teach the woman to fish. And it's easier to do that with women because women are victims of everything to do with having to fish for their own dinner. So
yeah, well, I mean, like, it's really gross to have to, like,
touch
puncture
that.
those worms, right? But
It's bread dough with a little bit of egg in it is better. But well, depends on what you're fishing for. But anyway, yeah, or actually, well, there are several different things that you can use for bait that don't involve killing a worm. I used to use crickets, but anyway, so yeah, the voting rights thing. There are reasons to talk about the voting rights thing, but that's not one of them. Then we have Ziranks, who gave us $5 and says, "Incoming angry MGTOW statement. Monica Lewinsky is evidence that even a once sensible woman can become a non-sensible woman, rendering AWOLT true." So first of all, I don't concede to the idea that Monica Lewinsky was ever sensible. I don't consider getting the job that she got with seducing the president as the main reason why she wanted that job. I don't consider that sensible. And I don't consider the fact that she didn't consider the repercussions of her actions to herself and to all of the people around her. I don't consider any of that sensible. So I think she was a nonsensible woman forever. The second half of his statement is he gave us $5 more and says, "This makes the honest women interested in siding with men's issues forever suspect, especially when they complain about being just one person." So my answer to that is every woman should be forever suspect. Every guy should be forever suspect. You never just automatically trust anybody unless you have developed a closeness with that person and you can be 100% certain of their character. Like strangers on the internet, which is what we are, even though you've heard our life stories, you've heard us talk about the issues, you've heard us talk about accountability and everything, the things that we know and the things that we've learned and the things that we've imparted, there should still be boundaries to your trust. That's not wrong. That should be that way whether we were male or female. What's really egregious with women and the expectations they have and in the demands that they make is that being female should exempt them from that standard. And I don't think it should. It shouldn't exempt any of us from that standard. And we're all going to have our asshole moments too. I've had a couple of them quite publicly on Twitter and had to walk things back that I've said or arguments that I've been in because, frankly, I was wrong and I was an asshole about it, which is an embarrassing thing to have happen. But you can't just assume that because somebody is right about some things, and even if they're right about a lot of things and they're aware of things that you're not accustomed to people of their sex being aware of, that they're going to be perfect. So it is good to be it is good to be aware of that, whether it means AWOLT. I don't think AWOLT can be considered any more true than all men are like that. And just because there are conditions that can cause a man to reach his breaking point and change his behavior, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way they are all the time, or that it's inevitable that every man's going to do that. So then we have Master Rogue gave us $10 and said, "Forgot to say, got another job finally, and the persuasive speech went better than one would expect when talking about men's rights, but there was still one that called the statistics opinion." My advice, don't take men's rights activism to work with you, especially not when you're new on the job, because it can cost you your job. It's better to keep your activism outside the workplace. And even if somebody attacks your workplace on the basis of your activism, you will be able to then point out, I'm not inflicting this on my workplace. I haven't come in here guns blazing, so my workplace shouldn't be dictating what I talk about on Twitter. That kind of thing. Then we have Jama gave us $2 Canadian and said, 6 weeks too late. Hey, Karen, enjoy your holidays. Dr. B. Diesel Frenzy gave us $10 and said, Karen, Prim, more content. Hannah's doing her part. Step it up now, ladies. So I got to remind you guys, in order to facilitate my ability to do this instead of taking overtime at work, I do get paid for creating the opening monologue and running the show. And it's like, I'm certainly not going to retire on what I get paid to do this, but it makes it possible for me to do this. Sorry. It makes it, my nose decided to just release everything down the back of my throat while I was explaining that. Because having allergies is gross. But no, I don't expect volunteers to be able to do everything I do because they are not getting paid to do this, and they have to earn money and take care of their own families. Karen does her own thing, and she's been doing a lot of public speaking. Prim is going to school full-time, and she also works, and she's about to have a baby. So there should be a little slack cut there in both counts.
There's a teeny tiny Prim on the way.
I know, I can't wait. That is going to be like the cutest baby ever. And then Xeranx gave us $5 and said, what I regarded sensible was her claim that it was consensual. And that is sensible, that it was her claim that it was consensual. She at least acknowledged that. But I think the other aspects of her character that led to the behavior in the first place kind of outweigh that in terms of in terms of the AWOL disagreement there.
No, she's not a sensible woman in the sense of like making good decisions.
Yeah.
She made some really, really, really poor decisions, but she actually owned those decisions immediately after the fact. And stuck with that ownership of her decisions for quite a while, and it's just only recently that she's sort of backpedaled and said, "Oh yeah, no, he was in a position of power over me, and so therefore my consent is vitiated under the law."
Yeah.
So, and it's just like, oh my fucking God, like really, is this where we're going?
Yeah,
right?
This is where we're going.
Because all I can tell you is that what we're going to end up with is a situation where men can only have sex with women of higher status than they are to stay on the right side of the law, and those women don't want to have sex with those men.
No. Well, they don't want to admit they had sex with those men. There's a difference there, and they'll end up that's actually kind of part of how rape law started. Was, he's lower status, rape. But in any case, the situation with Monica Lewinsky kind of brings me back to advice that I give when people ask me, how do you tell if it's even safe to date a woman? And it's always a risk. It's always a risk to date somebody, and it's you're vulnerable as a man under today's laws, and you're vulnerable under today's social attitudes and everything. And overall character, not just one thing, but overall character is going to have to be your guide. If you're going to make yourself vulnerable to a woman, you have to watch out for that kind of behavior. So somebody like Monica Lewinsky, as an example, she was able at that time to acknowledge that what she did with Bill Clinton was consensual. So what were the clues that she would be the kind of person that 20 years later would renege on her consent? Well, the fact that she basically lied about the situation to begin with. She then targeted somebody. Yeah, she targeted somebody for status. She played the innocent, not seductress, but the innocent, basically side chick. The innocent young person. She whined about the social repercussions of her actions. At one point, everybody was jokingly calling oral sex performed on a guy a Lewinsky. And her father actually came out. Don't use that term to describe that act. It's hurting our family. You know, like she and her family victim signaled as if...
Fuck, I'd love to have a sex act named after me.
Yeah, as if, you know, describing what she did somehow degraded her. But her act of doing it didn't, right? So the idea that she couldn't take responsibility for her part of that, and that she behaved irresponsibly in the first place. And then what did she do? She went and gossiped about it to another coworker that she made friends with. And no, Karen didn't say side chick. I said side chick. But in any case, you know, she kissed and told. She went off to the Pentagon, where she was shuffled off to protect Clinton from the scrutiny that he ended up facing anyway, and told everything to a woman who had a vendetta against the Clintons because of what they had done to her. Like, of all the people that she could have told, Linda Tripp, I mean, like, she had to have known. Linda Tripp was the woman who was called publicly, not just demonized, but completely slandered as crazy. Like, she was publicly debased by the Clintons because she pointed out that after the what was the guy's name that allegedly killed himself, that shot himself in the back of the head. Anyway, the office that he had, there were people carrying boxes of paperwork out, according to Linda Tripp, right? And she didn't have any evidence to back that. She didn't have any film. She didn't have any kind of recording or anything. So they came out and they basically painted her as a conspiracy theorizing nut job, and they shuffled her off to the Pentagon. And along comes Monica Lewinsky and dishes to her all of the dirt on her relationship. Yes, Vince Foster. Thank you, Mr. Monkey Lint. Dishes the dirt on her affair with Bill Clinton. And, and then she admits that she has clothing that might have his semen on it. And her story now on how she found that, in that story, she admits that she pushed him past one of his boundaries. The semen deposit on that dress happened because she talked him into finishing, rather than holding back. Up to that point, they hadn't consummated like that. And so this was a woman who essentially, through her own carelessness and her own self-aggrandizement, almost engineered this man's reputational downfall. And, I can't stand the Clintons. I absolutely hate, like, it makes me sick to defend the Clintons regarding anything. But what Monica Lewinsky did to Bill Clinton was reprehensible. And, you look at a woman's overall character, I can guarantee you she had regular behaviors, that would have been red flags to somebody that was aware and awake regarding these issues. You watch a woman be dishonest regardless of the consequences. You watch a woman be dishonest when she's not trying to mitigate a situation of unfairness. Not dishonest as in, yeah, we're going to write on this paper, this is what you learned and this is what you'll do the next time, but dishonest as in, I don't actually have the $50 I need to buy this. Can you lend me $50 when there's a $50 in her purse? Dishonest in, I am not responsible for what I did, you are. Dishonest in, oh yes, I'm a virgin and she's got a 3-year-old kid, That's a huge red flag, right? Dishonest as in underestimating the number of exes she has. If she tells you how horrible all her exes are, run. You know, if she tells you how great and wonderful all her exes are, she has to talk to you at all about all of her exes. You might consider exiting the scene at that point too. You know, if she can't talk about anything besides herself and her feelings and her wishes and her dreams, and she won't listen to yours, you should be out of there. If all of her exes are, you know, guys of high status, and you're a guy of high status, and
if they all live in Texas and you live in Texas,
no, if you're if all of her exes are guys of high income and you're of high income, and she seems to have gotten something from each of them and then gotten bored and left, you might want to get out of the relationship. You know, these are all things you look at. So this idea that Monica Lewinsky coming out later and saying that thing I said was consensual before wasn't consensual, that doesn't necessarily mean all women are like that. It means that one of men's vulnerabilities that needs to be addressed is the tendency to ignore red flags when the person displaying those red flags is a woman in whom he is interested sexually. And women do that too. It's one of the reasons women go for bad boys before they learn to do anything better. But men are recently, historically, told they're not allowed to do anything else. And I'm telling you, you should, and you are. And that's my answer to that.
There you go.
Our last super chat, Hoki Bukisa, gave us $2 and said, "Hey babe, can I get a Straughan?" So there we have.
Well, that all depends, you know, like, honestly, what's in it for me?
There you go. And let's see, we are at 11 o'clock. This has been a 3-hour sausage. So our poor Doc is going to have to put this all together. And that's going to be a lot of work. So I would just like to thank everybody for listening, especially everybody who stuck it out all the way to the end of the sausage. So yeah, everybody might need a few minutes and maybe a cigarette after this, except for me because I'm allergic. And with that, I would like to thank our everybody that was behind HBR Talk happening. And good night all.